Chapter 895. True and false, false and true. As long as 9 out of 10 pieces of evidence are true, no one cares if the last one is true or false. Wanha Peluo had a guilty conscience and confessed without being pressed. No one cares if the Arab emissary is real or fake. But what if he really did expose it? Although he knew that this question was inappropriate, Xue Qianjun couldn't help but ask. He had endured this question for a long time, and it felt like 100 claws had been clawing at his heart. He had no choice but to spit it out. Then we've really wronged him. Wang Chong indifferently said. Ah! Xue Qianjun was dumbstruck, his mouth wide open. Wang Chong grinned, shot a glance at Xue Qianjun, and then left with a wave of his sleeve. Xue Qianjun stood there in a daze, and after a long while, he suddenly understood and began to laugh. Wronged? Marquis was just teasing him. Marquis's thoughts are truly hard to guess. As this thought flitted through his mind, Xue Qianjun quickly followed. The night was getting darker, and everything was progressing in an orderly manner. Chonger, something's not right. After some time, as Wang Chong was inspecting his surroundings, Wang Chong's father, Wang Yan, and big brother, Wang Fu, suddenly walked out of the army. Wang Yan's brow was tightly furrowed, and he seemed rather uneasy. The Arabs still haven't moved. This truly isn't normal. In this battle, they lost around 80 to 90,000 soldiers, but most of them were infantry, with only 20 to 30% being cavalry. The remaining 200,000 cavalry weren't much affected, and they have the ability to counterattack. He is fully capable of launching a counterattack. It is indeed abnormal for him to remain so calm. Wang Chong's big brother, Wang Fu, also spoke. Wang Fu was dressed in black armor, his posture upright and his bearing imposing. Although he was young, Wang Fu was extremely experienced on the battlefield, and he also possessed an extremely sharp intuition. Wang Chong said nothing, only turned his head and looked past the army. On the horizon, he could see that the Arab cavalry had formed a massive arc, neither too far nor too close, facing off against the Tang dynasty. After capturing Wanha Peluo, Wang Chong and Gao Xianji dealt with the Karluk tribe, and then moved all the supplies into the city. During this entire process, the Arabs showed no signs of movement. They were abnormally calm, showing no signs of an attack. There's always something strange going on. The Arabs have always been fierce and aggressive, seeking revenge for the smallest grievance. Keeping their composure isn't their style. If I'm not wrong, they should be waiting for someone. Wang Chong smirked. With just a glance, he immediately understood. Waiting for someone? Who are we waiting for? Hearing Wang Chong's words, Wang Yan and Wang Fu exchanged glances. They were greatly surprised. The two of them only felt that the Arabs were acting a little strange, but Wang Chong was certain that they were waiting for someone. I don't know. But we'll find out soon enough. Wang Chong shook his head and waved behind him. Zhang Ke, increased the range of patrols. No matter what happens in the surroundings, I want to be the first to know if there's even the slightest disturbance. Yes. Your subordinate understands. Zhang Ke's voice came from behind him, and then he left with the clatter of footsteps. As the night deepened, while Wang Chong was leading the Qixi Protectorate in setting up defenses around Talas, to the east of the Tsong Mountains, in the distant western regions, in one of the 4 garrisons of Anxi, the town of Shul, a family was sleeping peacefully in their room. The man of the family slept on the edge of the bed while the mistress slept on the inside. In between them was a child of 3 or 4. The Battle of Talas had gathered hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the empires of the east and west, and the atmosphere was fraught with tension. The dangerous aura exuded by the battle had rendered the once bustling 4 garrisons of Anxi almost empty. Not many people could stay behind at this time, and those who stayed had their own reasons for not being able to leave. Buzz! All of a sudden, the bed shook twice. The man frowned in his daze and subconsciously called out. Suha, don't move around. The child clawed at the air a few times and then clung to the mistress, replying in a daze. I didn't. The room fell silent, but the bed shook once more, even more violently than before. This time, even the mistress was somewhat angry. Suha, don't be naughty. Don't move around while you're sleeping. Pa, it really wasn't me. The child felt wronged. As the child spoke, the bed shook once more, and this time, even the mistress noticed that something was wrong. A naughty child would never be this powerful. What's going on? Is it an earthquake? The mistress sleeping in the inner room was somewhat afraid. At this moment, the long neigh of a horse could be heard in the darkness. The man's expression changed. He quickly raised a finger and shushed her. The room instantly quietened down. The mistress seemed to sense something and hugged the child as she shrank into a corner, her body shivering and not daring to move. Rumble. In just a few moments, the ground began to shake even more violently. At first, it was like a sieve, but later, the entire room began to shake. Amidst the trembling, there was also the sound of horse hooves. The sound was as heavy as thunder, echoing in the night sky. The man trembled and hesitated for a moment. Then he gathered his courage and walked to the window. He quietly opened the window, revealing a sliver of space. With just a glance, his face instantly paled as if he had been dealt a heavy blow, and he hastily pulled back. Nay! At this moment, the snoring of a warhorse came from outside the window, and a faint light shone through the window. A moment later, the shadow of a massive warhorse was projected from outside and landed on the window. As the family of three looked on in panic, a somewhat hoarse voice came from outside. Sueya isn't far ahead, and the Anshi Protectorate headquarters is there. Gao Xianji went to Talas with 90% of his soldiers, leaving behind Feng Chongqing and several thousand soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate army. Should we go over and exterminate them along the way? The hoarse voice said in the flickering light of the fire. There's no need. Dewusili is coming from the east, and the Turkic army he's leading is coming from Kucha, so it's closer. I'll leave Feng Chongqing and the Anshi Protectorate army left behind to him. After a few moments of silence, another voice replied, this one extremely refined and scholarly. I'm worried about the Arabs right now. There are more than 300,000 Arab soldiers outside Talas, and the Arabs have always been vicious, even more belligerent than us. I originally believed that the Arabs had the advantage in numbers and could easily deal with the hundreds of thousands of foreign and Han soldiers of the Chishi Protectorate. I didn't think that they would win. At this moment, another loud and clear voice rang out. The hooves of a warhorse clattered as a tall and sturdy warhorse walked up from behind. Its shadow was projected outside the window. In the room, the family of three held their breaths, huddled together and shivering in fear, too frightened to speak. Relax. Abu Muslim won't lose that easily. How could someone who could become the governor of the east of the Arabian Empire lose so easily? Moreover, the Arab main force still exists. This battle is far from over. The scholarly voice confidently said. In addition, I've already received Abu Muslim's reply. He's already prepared. Once we arrive, the three sides will work together to exterminate the Tang dynasty's army. Talas is not the southwest, and Abu Muslim is not Jelafang. In this battle, neither the Anshi Protectorate army nor the Chishi Protectorate will have any chance of survival. If the Tang people can still survive, then he really can be called the war saint. Outside the window, there was a sudden silence. The other two figures did not speak, but they both nodded. Speed is of the essence in war. Our greatest advantage is that neither the Chishi Protectorate nor he knows that we've already set off. Their attention has been drawn away by the Arabs. As long as we can fool their eyes and ears, we can launch a surprise attack that will catch them off guard. The first hoarse voice spoke, a hint of anticipation in its voice. But don't get too careless. The Qixi Protectorate has an eagle team. Every time we go on a campaign, these eagles will scout and patrol the perimeter. Although we've been traveling at night and hiding during the day, if we can't fool the eyes and ears of the eagles, we'll still fall short. We won't be able to sneak up on him. The third voice boomed. It's just a few birds. There's no need to worry too much. I've taken care of everything. He won't have a chance to discover us. The scholarly voice in the middle confidently said. Hiya. With the last word, the three of them urged their horses and galloped away. In the room, the family of three breathed sighs of relief as if they had just escaped from death. While everyone's attention was focused on the battle at Talas, tens of thousands of warhorses were surging through the darkness from these two places. One of these two factions had entered Sueya while the other had taken a detour around Sueya, traveling through an even more concealed path. Under the stars and the moon, they crossed the Tsong Mountains with astonishing speed toward Talas. Hong long, the earth trembled, yellow sand filled the sky, and smoke and dust soared into the sky under the stars and moon. Thousands of warhorses were galloping through the dust. Although the sky was still dark, it was getting closer and closer to daybreak. Prime Minister, Whitestone Ridge isn't far up ahead. It's only 50 to 60 li from Talas. The hooves of the warhorse were as heavy as thunder. A strong warhorse galloped against the army and stopped in front of a tall and slender figure with a respectful expression. In front of him, three tall figures stood side by side. The slender figure in the middle was dressed in a scholarly robe and had a graceful bearing. However, the most impressive thing about him was his long and narrow eyes, which radiated a brilliant light and revealed infinite wisdom and sharpness, as if he could see through all the secrets of the world. If one looked carefully, this was the Daluan Ruozan who had walked out of the prison of the Uzan royal capital, washed clean of all impurities. Now that Daluan Ruozan had taken off his prisoner's clothes and put on his scholarly robe once more, he lost some of the elegance and handsomeness of the Daluan Ruozan of the southwest and gained the firmness and composure of someone who had survived a storm. Next to his saddle was a white cloth bag, the handle of a white fan poking out of it. The fan was rather old, but from its shape, it was the feather fan that he always carried with him. From the moment he entered the prison, Daluan Ruozan had put away this feather fan and replaced it with an azure sword. Buzz! Daluan Ruozan made a gesture with his hand, and the army immediately stopped. To his left and right, Huishu Wizong and Dusong Mangpoch focused their gazes on Daluan Ruozan. Bring the map. Chapter 896. Whoosh! Without the slightest hesitation, Daluan Ruozan unfurled the rolled-up map. A Uzan horseman walked over with a torch in his hand. The bright light of the torch illuminated the map, revealing countless ravines and ravines. The entire western regions, the Uzan Plateau, the western Turkic Khaganate, the majestic Tsong Mountains to the west of Sueya, and the distant city of Talas. Map of the continent. At the top of the map were these words written in the Uzan language. This was a detailed map that outlined all the factions around the western regions, and all the details were extremely detailed. Such a map was priceless, and not even Wang Chong had one. Wang Chong had once spent several months trying to draw up such a map, but in the end, he had only been able to produce a rough sand table of Talas. He had not been able to draw out a larger region. But in Daluan Ruozan's hands, not only Talas, but even the distant Arabian Empire was faintly visible on the map, all the proportions and details so perfect that it was astonishing. Even the secret passageway beside Sueya city was revealed on top of it. If Wang Chong were to see this map, he would assuredly be stunned. This was precisely the kind of map that he had strived for. This was a map of the entire continent. The Uzan had spent 100 years fighting against the various factions of the western regions before finally completing it. Unlike the Tang dynasty, the western regions had always been the sphere of influence of the Uzan Empire, which was why they had been able to draw up a map of the continent. In the entire world, there was only one such detailed map of the continent. Talas. Daluan Ruozan lowered his head, his eyes bright and intelligent. With a single sweep, he locked onto a protruding mark on the map. 53 li is the limit of the Tang dynasty's patrols. The Tang dynasty's Eagle team should have appeared. It's about time. Move. Yes, Prime Minister. Just as Daluan Ruozan's voice fell, a voice rang out from the shadows behind Daluan Ruozan. Da-da-da, the sound of the horse's hooves was as heavy as thunder. With the light from the torches, a fully armored general could be seen galloping away. In the dark of the night, it was impossible to see his appearance clearly. They could only see him charging towards the back of the army and quickly disappearing. In the darkness, Huishu Wuzong and Dusong Mengpoj glanced at each other, seeing the confusion in each other's eyes, but neither of them asked any questions. Time passed slowly, and the surroundings were quiet. Suddenly, boom, the sound of metal clanking came from the end of the group. Nothing could be seen in the darkness, but one after another, something seemed to be flying out of some kind of metal cage. The sound lasted for a very long time, and it was accompanied by some kind of rapid airflow. No one knew what was going on, and even Huishu Wuzong, who was closest to Daluan Ruozan, was confused. Although the vast majority of Daluan Ruozan's operations were carried out through him, not all of them were like this. In the several months that Daluan Ruozan had spent in the prison, he had met many people. Not even Huishu Wuzong knew what he had discussed with them or what he had ordered them to do. Gua. Just when everyone's doubts were at their deepest, the strange cry of an infant came from the sky. This cry was extremely strange, seeming like a cry that wasn't, seeming like a cry that wasn't. It gave everyone a fright. Look over there. Suddenly, someone in the group raised his uzun to the sky and pointed at a certain place as he shouted. Huishu Wuzong and Dusong Mengpoj subconsciously raised their heads. A bright moon hung high in the sky, cleansing the darkness around it. The moment the pair raised their heads, they saw that a massive black shadow had spread its wings and was flying through the moon. Even though it was very far away, the pair of Dusong Mengpoj and Dusong Mengpoj recognized it at a glance: vultures. These were vultures that could not be more commonly seen on the Uzun Plateau. When the Uzun performed sky burials, they were either buried or burned. Instead, they were fed to the most vicious birds of the plateau, the vultures, and they viewed this as a supreme honor. Although vultures were extremely common on the Uzun Plateau, vultures were not commonly seen to the west of the Tsong Mountains. A hint of surprise flitted through the eyes of both Huishu Huaitsong and Dusong Mengpoj when they saw this vulture flying through the moonlight. But this surprise did not last long before it was replaced by extreme shock. Caw caw. The cries of vultures came from the depths of the darkness, and right after the first vulture, a dense flapping of wings could be heard. As Dusong Mengpoj, Huishu Huaitsong, and the thousands of Tibetan cavalry watched, whoosh! A flock of vultures flew through the sky like a dark cloud, so dense that they even blotted out the bright moon. In a flash, the stars and moon dimmed, plunging the world into darkness. In that instant, countless soldiers and horses disappeared into the darkness along with their armors. Silence, the surroundings were filled with silence. Many pairs of eyes were staring at the flock of vultures in the sky, and none of them could say a word. Even Huishu Wuzong and Dusong Mengpoj, two Uzun great generals, were dumbfounded. The Uzun Empire had never placed much importance on its aerial forces. All of the empire's resources had been devoted to the training of cavalry. The pair had never imagined that Daluan Ruozan, in his prison cell, had managed to secretly train such a massive army of vultures behind their backs. A fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Haven't any of you sensed it yet at the Battle of the Triangular Gap? The aerial army is playing an increasingly important role in this era. At the very least, it's playing an increasingly important role in that person's hands. If we can't defeat him, the best method is to imitate him. Daluan Ruozan's indifferent and calm voice came from the darkness. Let's go. With these final words, Daluan Ruozan squeezed his horse's belly and took the lead to leap out from between the two. Move out. With Daluan Ruozan's order, the thousands of Uzan cavalry once more galloped toward the city of Talas under the cover of the vultures. Several li passed in the blink of an eye, only a few moments later. Cree. In the distance, a rock eagle was patrolling back and forth, drawing a huge arc in the sky. The dense army of steel on the horizon suddenly cried out and was just about to turn and leave. All of a sudden, a croak could be heard, like the cry of an infant. Before the rock eagle could fly back to transmit the signal, a swarm of countless vultures began to descend from the sky, pouncing madly on the rock eagle from all directions. With a sharp cry, the rock eagle was torn to shreds, its black feathers scattering down from the sky. Let's go. Below the rock eagle, an Uzan commander stood in the darkness, his eyes bright. Without even looking at the sky, he waved his hand, and the thousands of Uzan cavalry immediately charged through the area where the rock eagles were patrolling. In the sky, the flock of vultures screeched and continued to fly forward like a flowing black ribbon. Cree. Several li later, the second defense line appeared. Two rock eagles flew back and forth in the sky. The vultures swooped down, once more tearing this outer defense line to shreds. A third, a fourth, in just 10 some li, they encountered at least 7 or 8 defense lines laid down by the Tang dynasty. There were not many at each defense line, often only 1 or 2 or 3. Although there were not many of them, the rock eagles could not fly too low. At the same time, they could clearly see what was going on around them. They had clearly been meticulously calculated. Huishu Wizong and Dusong Mengpoj had originally believed that they had the advantage of being late and had not been noticed by the Tang people. But as they encountered one defense line after another, they couldn't help but feel their hearts sink. Did you sense it? This is his style, cautious and cautious. He won't give you the slightest chance. The slightest clue will immediately be noticed. In a battle with him, we must use all our strength and not be the slightest bit careless. As if knowing what the pair were thinking, Daluan Ruozan's voice rang out in their ears. His voice was extremely calm, suffused with a calming strength. He's too careful. With these defenses, it'll be very difficult for us to smoothly pass through without being noticed. Huishu Wizong worriedly said. That's right. He's laid down too many defense lines. Dusong Mengpoj agreed, a similar concern in his eyes. It was very difficult to believe that the fellow they had to deal with had been an insignificant youth in the War of the Southwest. But after this battle, he had completely changed. Even though they had yet to see that youth, the meticulously calculated distribution of birds made even a great general like Huishu Wizong feel a sliver of pressure. The Tang people were too powerful. It was said that the Tang dynasty had been peaceful for several decades, that the morale of the people had waned, and that their fighting power was no longer what it had been. But Uzan had suffered defeat after defeat at the hands of the Tang dynasty when its soldiers were at their strongest. And this was when they had the absolute advantage in numbers. The current Uzan had been suppressed to the very limit by the Tang dynasty. And that person's existence made all of Uzan restless. Even on the plateau, they found it hard to rest easy. This was also why they had mobilized their soldiers. There's no need to worry too much. Everyone has a weakness, and he is no exception. Daluan Ruozan's indifferent voice rang out in their ears. In addition, I've already figured out the pattern of his bird defenses. Buzz. Huishu Wizong and Dusong Mengpoj trembled at these words, their sharp eyes shining with shock as they reined in their horses. Chapter 897. Buzz. With a wave of his sleeve, Daluan Ruozan sent stellar energy out of his body, causing the map in his hand to float in the air. As everyone watched, Daluan Ruozan extended a palm and placed it over the map. As his 5 fingers moved, the radiance of the stars fell through the gaps between his fingers and onto the map. In the blink of an eye, the light and shadow on the map of the continent changed, and suddenly, countless dots of light appeared. These dots of light followed a certain pattern, accurately appearing on the map of the continent, above the mountains, hills, and plains, all the way to Talas. Dusong Mengpoj and the surrounding Uzan generals couldn't help but grimace at this sight. Only Huishu Wizong remained indifferent. Daluan Ruozan was not an expert of the great general level, and the prime ministers of the empire needed to spend a great deal of time handling government affairs, so the majority of them were not very skilled in martial arts. But this did not mean that their martial arts were very poor. Daluan Ruozan's control over stellar energy was no weaker than Huishu Wizong's. Do you see it clearly? This is where the Tang people are defending. Take the vulture army and exterminate them one by one. Daluan Ruozan calmly said, his voice suffused with formidable confidence. Yes, Prime Minister. A series of respectful voices came from his ear as 5 or 6 Tibetan officers carefully examined the points of light on the map and then flew off. Caw! Amidst the deafening cries, countless vultures covered the sky and covered the earth as they rapidly flew forward. Dusong Mengpoj slightly creased his brow as he looked at the dots of light on the map, a look of confusion in his eyes. Let's go. This is your first time working with a prime minister. You'll understand after some time. Huishu Huaitsong patted Dusong Mengpoj's shoulder with a broad palm and grinned as he urged his horse forward. In a daze, Dusong Mengpoj turned his head and realized that at some point, Daluan Ruozan had put away the map of the continent and was galloping away on his horse, leaving only his back to Dusong Mengpoj. It's really hard to guess. Dusong Mengpoj looked up at the sky and gave a long sigh, but his mind was relaxed. Daluan Ruozan, who had just walked out of the capital's dungeon, was erratic and unpredictable, like a heavenly steed soaring through the sky, completely unfathomable. Dusong Mengpoj had never worked with Daluan Ruozan before, but this was a blessing, not a curse, for the entire Uzan. As for whether Daluan Ruozan's excellent judgment was right or wrong, they would soon find out. Caw! Flocks of vultures flew through the darkness like ghosts, and on the ground, the Uzan commanders faithfully carried out Daluan Ruozan's plan. Flocks of vultures swooped towards the spots marked on the map of the continent. Ear-piercing screeches rang out as rock eagles fell from the sky one after another, feathers flying in all directions. These rock eagles didn't even have a chance to escape before they were killed one by the flock of vultures. 1, 2, 3, 4. In the sky, the flock of vultures opened a path while the tens of thousands of Uzan cavalry rapidly advanced. The tens of thousands of Uzan soldiers were advancing with astonishing speed toward the city of Talas. 40 li, 37 li, 30 li, 25 li, the Uzan army was getting closer and closer to Talas. Daluan Ruozan's plan was working, and even now, the Tang people had been completely unaware of it. Most astonishing of all was that Daluan Ruozan's judgment was meticulous and flawless. The Tang people had completely predicted the location of their defenses. This time, even Dusong Mengpoj could sense that Daluan Ruozan had truly found their weakness and accurately deduced all their plans. If this continues, we really will be able to launch a night raid on the Tang people, and we won't give them any chance to react. Dusong Mengpoj quietly said to himself. In all his years of campaigning with the Tang dynasty, Dusong Mengpoj had never felt that things had gone so smoothly. Unlike in the past, he was completely confident that the Tang people would not respond. 25 li was truly astonishing at such a close distance. There's still an hour. There's plenty of time before daybreak. There's still 10 li. As long as we can smoothly break through their defenses without being discovered, we can catch them off guard. Daluan Ruozan sat on his mighty Uzan steed, looking up at the eastern sky, his eyes flashing as he rapidly calculated. Daybreak was getting closer and closer, but even so, the Uzan army still had a chance. Daybreak was the time when people tended to relax the most. As long as they could fool the eyes and ears of the Tang people and launch a surprise attack at that moment, they could still deal a heavy blow to the Tang people. Pass on my order. All soldiers dismount and wrap their hooves. Abandon the supply wagons in the rear and advance at full speed. Daluan Ruozhen ordered with a wave of his hand. Yes. Prime Minister. A few moments later, the army was back on the road, moving even faster than before. 24 li. 23 li. A flock of vultures swooped down, sweeping up 5 or 6 rock eagles patrolling in the sky. The scouts on the ground didn't even have time to send out a message before they were swarmed by hundreds of Uzun scouts and killed. 22 li, 21 li. The defensive line the Tang people had set up was getting denser and denser, and the number of scouts was also increasing. But all of them were wiped out by Daluan Ruozhen with thunderous momentum. At this moment, the thousands of Uzun cavalry and the 2 Uzun great generals, Wuxia Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoj, all appeared nervous. Even though Daluan Ruozhen said nothing, his body was leaning forward on the back of his horse. His tense body and focused eyes indicated that his mind was stretched to its limit. 20 li, 18 li, they were getting closer and closer. There were still several li left. As long as the Tang people didn't discover them, the Uzun army would be able to launch a successful sneak attack. Hurry! A nervous voice came out of the darkness. The moment a group of rock eagles appeared in the sky, an Uzun general on the ground immediately sent out a signal. This time, the rock eagles in the sky seemed even more vigilant than the previous ones. With a sharp cry, 5 or 6 of them scattered in every direction. In that instant, everyone on the ground felt as if their hearts were in their throats. Everyone's eyes were filled with nervousness. Caw! The vultures in the sky swooped down, howling as they charged at the fleeing rock eagles. The battle swiftly unfolded. According to Prime Minister's plans, this was the Tang people's last defensive line within 10 li of Talas. If they could break through this defensive line, they would only be 15 li from Talas. As long as they could silently get within 15 li of the Tang people, they would be able to launch a perfect sneak attack on the Tang people. Buzz! All the Uzun generals looked up at the sky, nervous expressions on their faces. They won't be able to escape. Daluan Ruozhen looked up at the sky, his expression calm, but it exuded a powerful self-confidence. He had spent countless hours preparing for today's battle, and he had personally planned all the vulture tactics. None of the birds would have a chance to escape. As for the Tang dynasty scouts on the ground, he had already dispatched soldiers to exterminate them. This elite force had been trained by Wuxia Wuzong in the prison, and he had obtained the full cooperation of all the generals of the Uzun King districts. Each scout had been carefully selected and trained to hunt down and kill the Tang people's scouts. All of them were capable of fighting 1 against 10. The fact that the Tang people had still not sent out a signal meant that the Tang people's scouts had succeeded. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Daluan Ruozhen looked up at the sky, constantly counting. As if by magic, with each number Daluan Ruozhen counted, a rock eagle would fall from the sky, surrounded and attacked by the vultures. As Daluan Ruozhen counted down to 5, whoosh! An arrow shot out from behind him. Dusong Mangpoj, seated on his handsome steed of the Great Snow Mountain, had drawn his bow and shot down the last rock eagle. Success! The sight of the last rock eagle plummeting from the sky caused a cheer to rise from the ground. The Uzun generals looked up at the sky and clenched their fists. They had finally succeeded. They had broken through so many of the Tang people's defenses, and now they had finally broken through the last one. Now, the Uzun only needed to charge in and wipe out their shame, deal the Tang people an unprecedented blow, and then work with the Arabs to destroy the Tang dynasty's Anxi and Qixi protectorate, forever altering the map of the western regions. All was quiet, with only the light of the moon and stars in the sky and the sound of the wind. Daluan Ruozhen carefully listened to his surroundings. Finally, he gave a satisfied nod and gave a long sigh. When fighting with Wang Chong, one could not be the slightest bit careless. From the moment they had set out from the Uzun Plateau until now, he had finally turned the tables and won a true victory. As long as he grasped the initiative, it would be his turn to strike. In the first round, the Uzun and the Tang dynasty had finally won. Move out. As he watched his highland steed exhale an icy white breath, Daluan Ruozan waved his hand and gave the order to move out. Rumble. The thousands of Uzun soldiers exploded with killing intent, and like a thawing river of ice, they charged into the distance. Kiki. However, at this moment, a sharp cry suddenly came from the night sky. This cry was so sharp that it would have been impossible to notice unless one was paying close attention. But when this cry fell into Daluan Ruozan's ears, the calm and composed Daluan Ruozan instantly shuddered as if he had been struck by lightning. Buzz! In a flash, Daluan Ruozan raised his head and looked in the direction of that sharp cry. Over the thousands of warhorses, over the mountains, Daluan Ruozan could clearly see a tiny sparrow take off from the branches of a mountain and fly into the distance. Chapter 898. Oh no! This was the only thought that remained in Daluan Ruozan's mind as he watched the fleeing sparrow. Although sparrows were common in the western regions, they were extremely rare in the barren, rocky, and barren lands west of the Tsong Mountains, because there was nothing for sparrows to hunt for. Moreover, the weather was getting colder, and sparrows would never appear in a place like this in this season. Twang! In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, there was a loud sound. The bowstring trembled, and a long arrow shot out from behind. Although it was shot later, it arrived first. The arrow pierced through the sparrow, and the huge force caused the sparrow's corpse to fall to the ground. But Daluan Ruozan's expression did not change at all because of the fall of the sparrow. At the end of his vision, he could see a small black silhouette vanishing into the distance. It was a gray-brown sparrow hawk. As the vultures hunted down the 5 rock eagles, everyone's attention was focused on the sky. It was also at this moment that the grayish-brown sparrow hawk soared into the sky from a distant tree branch and rapidly tore through the air. Its speed was extremely fast. In just a short while, it had already flown out of sight. Even the archers could not reach it, let alone the vultures in the sky. I miscalculated. Daluan Ruozan closed his eyes and gave a deep sigh, the hands hidden in his sleeves trembling. From start to finish, he and Wang Chong had been winning this invisible contest. The tens of thousands of Uzun soldiers were already 18 li from Talas, but Wang Chong had shown no reaction. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to succeed, he had fallen prey to one of the sparrows that Wang Chong had hidden in the tree. When patrolling, all flying birds were in the air. The higher they flew, the more they could see. Thus, no one would place scouting birds on the ground or on a tree. Daluan Ruozan had accurately determined where Wang Chong had set up his defenses, but he had not expected to lose here. Prime Minister, what do we do? Everyone seemed to sense something, and they all turned to Daluan Ruozan. Even Huishu Wuzong and Duso Mengpoj paled. Something unexpected happened. A sparrow hawk had completely disrupted everyone's plans. It was too late to stop it. Whether Wang Chong was prepared or not was a completely different matter to them. There was no question that the moment that sparrow hawk flew out, they had been exposed. The mood instantly turned grave. Prime Minister, should we change the plan? Should we continue forward? Huishu Wuzong probed. Daluan Ruozan said nothing, but his eyes were constantly shifting, making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. After what seemed like a second, but also like countless eons, Daluan Ruozan suddenly smiled and shook his head. As expected of the person I know. If he really did not know anything and allowed us to sneak all the way to the city of Talas, I would actually feel a little uneasy. But now is the true battle between us. Since we've been discovered, there's no need to hide it. Unfurl the banners and remove the cloth wrapping the hooves. We will openly march into Talas. Yes. Prime Minister. Rumble. this time, the Uzun army no longer concealed itself. Tens of thousands of soldiers stirred up a cloud of dust as they galloped toward the city of Talas. Marquis. It's bad. At the same time, outside the distant city of Talas, Zhang Ke rushed in a panic to Wang Chong's position. What's wrong? Wang Chong, his father Wang Yan, his big brother Wang Fu, the invincible great general Li Sai, and the king of Ganka were observing the Arabs. When he saw Zhang Ke's expression, he turned his head and slightly frowned. Marquis, something big has happened. An army of tens of thousands of soldiers has appeared behind us. They're moving with incredible speed, and all the scouts I set up along the way, as well as the birds in the sky, have been eliminated by them. They've already gotten close to Talas and are less than 10 li from us. Zhang Ke kneeled on the ground, his face ghastly pale. What? Next to Wang Chong, Wang Yan, Wang Fu, Li Sai, and the king of Ganka trembled in shock, all of them grimacing. All of them had been discussing a strategy to deal with the Arabs, but now, they had fallen deathly silent. To the east of the city of Talas, across a plain, more than 200,000 elite Arab soldiers and Abu Muslim, the Arab governor of the east, were eyeing them like a tiger watching its prey. While all of them were focused on the Arabs, the sudden appearance of an army of tens of thousands in the rear was extremely fatal. The Tang dynasty was now under attack from both the front and the rear. This was a major taboo in leading an army. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop, and the atmosphere instantly became tense. Zhang Ke kneeled on the ground, beads of sweat oozing out of his forehead, drenching his robes. Keeping watch on the perimeter, discovering enemy forces ahead of time, and scouting out enemy forces, this was Zhang Ke's duty in the army. But tens of thousands of enemy soldiers had advanced without him noticing at all, even allowing them to get so close. This was a massive dereliction of duty. This was an enemy army of tens of thousands. The enemy had stealthily approached and attacked his scouts and flying birds. Their hostility was obvious. If his own mistake resulted in his army being attacked, Zhang Ke would never be able to forgive himself. What's going on here? Where did these enemies come from? How could the entire western regions have so many soldiers? Wang Yan was the first to speak. Upon receiving Zhang Ke's report, Wang Yan's first reaction was that this was impossible. Wang Chong had only just arrived at the city of Talas a day ago, so how could an army of tens of thousands suddenly appear in the rear? And there had been no warning at all. This was too sudden. Zhang Ke, are you sure? Wang Yan stared at Zhang Quebec. Seeing Zhang Ke nod, Wang Yan's expression instantly turned grim. The expressions of the other generals also darkened. How could this be? Did the Arabs bribe the other kingdoms of the western regions? Wang Fu muttered, and his expression became extremely solemn. If this was a one-on-one battle, Wang Fu wouldn't have cared. But now, there was a wolf in front and a tiger in the back. The entire Qixi army had fallen into an unprecedented passive and disadvantageous position. The Battle of Talas was of utmost importance. The outcome of this battle would directly affect Anxi, Longxi, and the Anxi of the capital. The Tang dynasty simply could not afford to lose. Impossible. Wang Fu had barely spoken when the king of Ganka rejected the idea. The western regions are all small countries that can't gather an army of tens of thousands. Moreover, it's still uncertain who will win the war between the Tang dynasty and Arabia. The kingdoms of the western regions will not, nor do they have the courage to, intervene at a time like this. A war between elephants and lions is not something they can participate in. Elephants and lions was the impression all the kingdoms of the western regions had of this war between the Tang dynasty and Arabia. Anyone who was swept up in this war would be crushed into powder. The wisest course of action was to stay out of the way, and this was what the kingdoms of the western regions were doing. The king of Ganka did not believe that any of the small countries of the western regions would seek their own destruction at a time like this. But we've already cleaned out the soldiers of Uzun's northern border. There are no more soldiers to send, and the black wolf Yabgu Agudulan was killed by Marquis. All the soldiers on the border have also been cleaned up. If it's not the kingdoms of the western regions, who else could it be? What other faction could gather an army of tens of thousands at a time like this? Li Sai spoke up as well, and his expression was equally solemn. The two largest armies in the vicinity of the western regions were Arabia and the Tang dynasty. It was simply impossible for a third faction to appear out of thin air. The strangest thing was that the tens of thousands of soldiers on the other side were only 10 li from Talas and could arrive at any moment. But even now, no one knew who these people were, not even the origins of this faction. This sort of situation had never happened before. Everyone turned to look at Wang Chong. Wang Chong said nothing, his fingers lightly tapping as if he was thinking about something. A few moments later, Wang Chong finally opened his eyes. There's no need to think about it. It must be Uzun and the Western Turkic Khaganate. Everyone was flabbergasted by Wang Chong's words. In all of the western regions, only Uzun and the Western Turkic Khaganate are worthy of waiting for Abu Muslim and his hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers. Wang Chong indifferently said as he gazed at the vast sea of Arab soldiers. Wang Chong's voice was neither loud nor soft, but his deep eyes exuded a powerful conviction. For a moment, everyone was silent as they stared at Wang Chong, speechless. But Marquis, didn't we just sign a truce with the Western Turks? Li Sai said in shock. Agreements have always been made to be torn up. We signed so many agreements with Uzun, but didn't Uzun still tear them up? Wang Chong calmly said. At this critical moment, he was the only one who could maintain his composure. In the Battle of Talas, the Tang dynasty and Arabia mobilized all their forces, emptying Qishi and Anshi of their forces. It seems like Uzun and the Western Turks saw a chance and moved out. Zhang Ke, scout again. Yes, Marquis. Zhang Ke's expression was grave, and without a word, he immediately flew off. Zhang Ke left quickly, but he returned even faster. It only took a few moments for him to return with a report. Reporting to Marquis, there are more than 70,000 soldiers in the rear, all of them Uzun cavalry. Moreover, the enemy isn't even trying to conceal themselves. They are flying the banner of Uzun. Zhang Ke's face was pale, his voice trembling. Everything was as Wang Chong had predicted, and the surrounding officers all grimaced. The Uzun and the Western Turks had actually moved out at this moment. They were now in an extremely disadvantageous position. But Zhang Ke had not even finished speaking. Marquis, besides the Uzun war banner, we've also discovered a black Uzun war banner with white yak hair in the Uzun army. Zhang Ke raised his head and stealthily sized up Wang Chong as he hesitantly said. Buzz. The Gonka king had no reaction to these words, but Wang Yan, Wang Fu, Li Sai, and the others all trembled and turned to Zhang Quebec. At this moment, even Wang Chong couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. There was only one place in the Uzun Empire that worshipped the white yak and used it as its war banner. The Ngari royal lineage. Chapter 899. What's going on here? Wasn't the Ngari royal lineage wiped out by us? How could there still be a white yak flag with a black background? A voice muttered from the side, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Chen Bin had personally experienced the War of the Southwest. That battle had been so bitter that the Annam Protectorate had almost been completely wiped out. In the end, it had been Wang Chong who had turned the tide and routed the Mengshi, Yusang army. Duluan Ruozan had returned to the plateau with less than 10,000 cavalry, and Wang Chong's plague had wiped out all of the cattle and sheep of the Ngari royal lineage, turning it into a land of famine almost deserted. Duluan Ruozan had disappeared without a trace, and the Ngari royal lineage only existed in name. The white yak and black Uzun war banner had also vanished. No one had expected to see the war banner of the Ngari royal lineage at a time like this. In a flash, everyone turned to Wang Chong. It's him. No wonder, Wang Chong narrowed his eyes and mentally muttered to himself. Although he had not personally participated in Zhang Kei's patrol area, he had been the one who had given the general direction. To be able to silently remove all the spies and ears in the periphery and break into the range of 10 miles, this was definitely not something that an ordinary person could do. But if this person was Daluan Ruozhen, then everything could be explained. Wang Chong had never imagined that he would appear at the Battle of Talas. This was something that had never happened in his last life. There was no doubt that this was yet another domino effect that he had triggered. Is it for revenge? Wang Chong closed his eyes, his mind in turmoil. Although he couldn't see anything, Wang Chong could sense that behind Talas, a figure was leading thousands of cavalry from the western regions. A fire blazed in his chest, just like himself. The time had changed, the location had changed, but he and Daluan Ruozhen had once more met, and at the most crucial moment of the Battle of Talas. Wang Chong was certain that this timing had been meticulously calculated by the general of the Ngari royal lineage. Even so, Wang Chong was fearless. Report. Marquis, we've spotted enemy troops behind us. They're less than 8 li away. Just as Wang Chong was thinking to himself, a cloud of dust rose as another scout rode over on a warhorse, looking extremely nervous. Buzz. As soon as the scout finished speaking, the atmosphere immediately became more and more tense. This time, it was not just Wang Chong and the others who sensed the abnormality. Even the other armies felt somewhat uneasy. With the speed of the cavalry, the distance of 8 miles was covered in the blink of an eye. There was not much time left. They had to make a decision as soon as possible. Marquis, look. At this moment, the armored Kong Xian, standing next to Li Sai, suddenly turned to the front and pointed at the Arab army. Everyone turned their heads and saw that the Arab army had raised black war banners in the first rays of dawn. More than 200,000 elite Arab cavalry were like an endless flood of black steel slowly surging toward the city of Talas. This sudden movement attracted everyone's attention, and many Anshi Protectorate army soldiers began to appear on the walls of Talas. With the Arabian soldiers in front and the Yuzhan cavalry led by Daluan Ruozhen in the rear, the more than 100,000 Chishi reinforcements were instantly caught in a pincer attack. Not only that, the Arabs were clearly trying to restrain Wang Chong's Chishi reinforcements, creating an opportunity for the Yuzhan army in the rear. Rumble. While everyone was staring at the Arab army, in the rear of the battlefield, a cloud of dust was rising into the heavens, and a faint tremor could be felt from the earth beneath their feet. The Yuzhan army was advancing faster than they had imagined. In just a few moments, they were about to reach the city of Talas. Milord. Everyone sensed the intense danger, and they all turned to Wang Chong, the mood extremely tense. The current situation was as perilous as an egg. Wang Chong had to make a decision as quickly as possible. If the Arabs and Yuzhan attacked from the front and rear, the more than 100,000 Tang soldiers would be completely wiped out, all their efforts for naught. Rumble. The trembling intensified, and in just a few moments, the Yuzhan army had advanced once more, getting closer and closer to the city of Talas. Everyone had nervous expressions on their faces. Milord, time is of the essence. Should we enter the city? At this moment, a tall and somewhat elderly figure behind Wang Chong's older brother, Wang Fu, broke the silence. It was none other than Chen Shusun, an old subordinate of the Wang clan. Chen Shusun had followed Wang Chong's father for many years, and later on, he had been sent by Wang Yan to protect Wang Fu. He had a very deep relationship with all 3 generations of the Wang clan. In the War of the Southwest, he had fought side by side with Wang Chong and had always addressed Wang Chong as young master. But now that Wang Chong was Chishi Protector General, Chen Shusun addressed Wang Chong as Milord. The city of Talas can hold hundreds of thousands of people. If we retreat into the city now, we can avoid being attacked from both sides. There's still time. The Chishi reinforcements didn't have many choices. They could either stay where they were and be attacked from both sides, or they could retreat into the city and use the sturdiness of the city of Talas to resist the combined army of Arabs and Uzan. Although the gates of Talas had been on the verge of destruction, the craftsmen that Wang Chong had brought had completely repaired them and even strengthened them, making them even sturdier than before. If they wanted to retreat into the city, this was the best opportunity. As a matter of fact, this was the best choice for all of them. Wang Chong said nothing, only slightly raised his head and slowly closed his eyes. The quaking of the earth intensified as Daluan Ruozan's army got closer and closer to Talas, and the dark cloud over the more than 100,000 soldiers of Qixi only thickened. Everyone around Wang Chong was holding their breath, waiting for Wang Chong's final decision. Even Wang Yan was the same. Whether it was in the War of the Southwest, the Battle of the Triangular Gap, or the battle with the Black Wolf Yabgu, Wang Chong had amply proven his abilities and won everyone's trust. Whether they fought or stayed, if there was one person who could win everyone's trust, it was Wang Chong. Rumble. Dust churned in the distance as massive tremors shook the entire battlefield. Daluan Ruozan's army could appear at any moment. In the rear, the black tide of Arab soldiers was advancing faster and faster, each clattering of hooves seemingly stomping on the hearts of the Qixi Protectorate soldiers. Time was fleeting. Whether they stayed or left, fought or retreated, Wang Chong had to make a decision as quickly as possible. At this moment, the lives of the more than 100,000 Qixi reinforcements were in Wang Chong's hands. Boom! There was a metallic clattering as the nearby gates of the city of Talas opened. A group of Anxi Protectorate army officers appeared, anxiously marching toward Wang Chong. Leading them was the Vice Protector General of the Anxi Protectorate Army, Qing Qianli. His lips trembled as if he was about to say something to Wang Chong. Almost at the same time, in the distance, the neighing of war horses could be heard. Billowing smoke and dust rose into the air from the distant hills. Although nothing could be seen, a huge commander's flag with black and white stripes appeared in everyone's vision amidst the intense neighing of the horses. On top of the commander flag, there was a muscular and strong white yak. In an instant, a strong pressure came crashing down on them. Daluan Ruozan's soldiers were about to arrive. Ha! Just when everyone was in an extremely disadvantageous position, Wang Chong faintly smiled and opened his eyes, a dazzling light bursting from them. You're right, Wang Chong said. Pass on my order. All craftsmen are to move out and construct the second defense line to the east of Talas as quickly as possible. Yes, my lord. All infantry, shield men, and the Ganka people, as well as the soldiers of greater and lesser valor, are to immediately take up the first defense line. Work with the City of Steel to defend against the Arab attacks. No matter how great the price, you must hold them down. Yes, my lord. Chen Bin, divide the ballista army into two groups. 1,500 ballista groups will form one group. One group will remain and use the transport carriages to fire from the high ground. Work with the infantry to defend against the Arab cavalry in the west. Give the other group to Su Kui and have him block the Uzan Empire in the east. Yes, Marquis. In a few short moments, Wang Chong had issued a string of orders, each one extremely clear. With this final order, Wang Chong turned to the massive figure of Li Sai. Li Sai, get ready. In a little while, you will come with me to see an old friend of Uzan's. At the mention of bold friend, Wang Chong's eyes exploded with an intimidating light. Yes. Li Sai's eyes lit up when he heard this. He let out a furious roar, and a powerful battle intent burst forth from his mountainous body. Although Wang Chong had not explicitly said it, everyone understood his final decision. In front of them was the Arabian army and behind them was the Uzan army. They were being attacked from both sides and were in an extremely disadvantageous position. But so what? Fight, fight, fight. That was all. The Southwest Army had not retreated, the Triangular Gap had not retreated, and they would not retreat this time. This was the true style of the Tang dynasty. On this continent, there was nothing that could make the Tang dynasty retreat, and certainly nothing that could make the Tang dynasty submit. Rumble. Su Kui, Chen Bin, Zhao Jingdian, Chen Burang, Sun Jiming, Chen Shu Sun, the king of Gonka, Huang Batian, Kong Xian, Xue Qianjun, and the others galloped off on their warhorses. There was no doubt or argument. At this moment, all of them felt like a flame was burning in their hearts and their blood was boiling. The entire Qixi army was like an enormous machine that began to move. Chapter 900. Buzz. Following Wang Chang's order, tens of thousands of craftsmen rode their carriages to the eastern defense line of Talas. Furnaces blazed, black smoke billowed, and metal clattered as the massive steel modules were hammered into the eastern wall by the craftsmen. Streams of molten steel poured down and fastened the steel walls to the eastern wall. For the sake of today's city of Talas, Wang Chong had spent more than 2 months preparing. All the smithing clans of the Central Plains, including the swordsmithing shops and smiths, had received Wang Chang's order. Countless steel modules had been transported to Wuxiang day and night precisely so that they could deal with today's situation. Modular construction was completely different from ordinary defense line construction. Its biggest advantage was speed. The area behind the more than 100,000 soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate had originally been empty, but a few moments after Wang Chong gave the order, a long and straight steel wall had appeared on the ground, establishing a firm defense line for the more than 100,000 soldiers. Just like how Wuxiang had been able to erect a 30-foot-tall steel fortress in a single night, only Wang Chong was capable of such a miraculous feat. Tens of thousands of craftsmen were still pouring and perfecting the second defense line, and there was still some time before they were finished. On the other side, the more than 100,000 soldiers had begun to move according to Wang Chong's order. Hurry, hurry, hurry. In front of the first defense line, Chen Bin, clad in meteoric metal armor and wielding a Wuxia steel sword, was constantly issuing orders. The ballista army, consisting of 3,000 ballistae and 15,000 soldiers, quickly divided into two. The 7,500 soldiers stationed there quickly boarded the tall transport carriages and began to control the 1,500 ballistae. They were arranged into 3 echelons of 500 soldiers, each of them aiming at the 500 gaps in the steel walls. When the cavalry charged, these steel walls were the best obstacles and obstacles. If the Arabs wanted to charge in, they would have to split up and come through the gaps in the steel walls. This was where the ballista was most lethal. While more than 1,500 ballistae were swiftly taking up positions, the shield-bearers of the more than 100,000 Qixi soldiers were swiftly approaching the first defense line. Row after row, they took aim at every gap. Throughout the entire process, even the troops of greater and lesser valor were mobilized. The troops of greater and lesser valor weren't as elite as those of the Tang dynasty. In this era where cavalry dominated, greater and lesser valor didn't have much of a presence. However, their spearmen were extremely elite. The spears they were equipped with were far more elite than the spearmen of any other faction. This was also why Wang Chong had hired soldiers from greater and lesser valor. The spearmen of greater and lesser valor and the shield-bearers of the Tang dynasty were almost perfectly coordinated. This defense line was also extremely intimidating and perfectly suited to restrain cavalry. Bzzz. The earth quaked as the soldiers of greater and lesser valor, Qixi, and Wang Yan's infantry and shield-bearers completed their defense. Meanwhile, the king of Gonka, mounted on a red horse, led the fierce Gonka people and the other mercenaries of the western regions into position. Everyone, hear my order. Without my order, no one is allowed to retreat. Anyone who disobeys will be executed. The king of Gonka's eyes were like stars, his sharp gaze sweeping over the steel walls to the surging black tide of the Arab army. All the Gonka people around him were lined up in square formations, their eyes vicious and brimming with fighting intent. Arabia and the Tang dynasty, this was a battle between a lion and an elephant. In this battle, each person needed to make their stand clear and make their own choice. There was no question that the Gunka people had chosen the Tang dynasty. Come. Even if I die in battle today, I will have no regrets. The king of Gonka's eyes were bright, his black cloak flapping in the wind as a powerful aura blazed around him. Among Wang Chang's subordinates, the king of Gonka was one of the few saint martial experts, and he was even stronger than the invincible great general Li Sai. The king of Gonka was a proud man. In the western regions, he had never lowered his head. But now, this illustrious king of Gonka had lowered his head for Wang Chong. The once lowly Gonka people, the Gonka people known as filthy boors, could finally wash away their shame and live with dignity. The king of Gonka could only repay the Tang dynasty and Wang Chong with his life. Come. Let's fight. The king of Gonka fiercely clenched the barbaric god axe, all the blood in his body boiling. Rumble. While the king of Gonka was preparing to fight to the death, on the other side, more than 100,000 soldiers were rapidly mobilizing. If one looked down from the sky, in the vast region in front of the city of Talas, the more than 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty were like a surging river. They seemed fierce, but not disorderly, all of them moving in unison, following some sort of rule. To be able to mobilize more than 100,000 soldiers in such an orderly manner in such a short amount of time without the slightest hint of chaos was something only Wang Chong could do. While tens of thousands of craftsmen were rapidly constructing the second steel wall to the east of the city of Talas, 1,500 ballista teams were moving behind the gap. At the same time, the soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate, the Annan Protectorate, and the Imperial Court, 80% of the Qixi reinforcements were moving in the direction of the Yuzhan army. Using the infantry, spearmen, shieldmen, and ballista squads to stop the more than 200,000 Arab soldiers, by time for the other armies to attack. Then, using 80% of the army's strength, he would first eliminate the weaker Tibetans in the east, and then turn around and concentrate his forces against the Arabs, defeating them one by one. This was the strategy that Wang Chong had devised in the blink of an eye, and it was also the best way to escape from being attacked from the front and rear. Li Sai, follow me. In the howling winds, Wang Chong mounted the white-hoofed shadow, and his eyes flashed as he shot past the second steel defense line like a wisp of smoke toward the plains to the east of the city of Talas. All soldiers, hear my order. Follow me. Without another word, Li Sai waved his hand and led the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry in pursuit of Wang Chong. Dust filled the air as Wang Chong rode east in the direction that the Yuzhan had come from. "Milord," on the high walls of the city of Talas, the Anxi Protectorate army officers looked worriedly in the direction that Wang Chong had gone, and they subconsciously turned to Anxi Protector General Gao Xianji. "It's fine. Let him go." Gao Xianji gazed at the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry, a glimmer of light in his eyes. In addition, the one who came this time was an old friend of his. Gao Xianji had been in the military for many years, so he had a thorough understanding of the various factions. The moment that Black Yak banner appeared, Gao Xianji knew that it was Daluan Ruozhen, Wang Chong's mortal enemy in the southwest. Although they were both top-class generals of the continent, one was the wise minister of the Ngari royal lineage while the other was the Anxi Protector General. Gao Xianji had never seen Daluan Ruozhen before. In comparison, Wang Chong was far more suitable. Rumble. As Wang Chong rode off, the shaking of the earth in the distance grew more intense, gradually reaching a peak. Wang, in the distance, behind the hills, smoke and dust billowed like a sea of fog. In that sea of fog, tens of thousands of warhorses suddenly galloped out. In the faint morning light from the east, they were like ghosts stepping out of the underworld. Caw! With a strange cry like the wail of an infant, hundreds of vultures flew out from the rear of the army encircled in the sky. In the shadows cast by the vultures, in the center of the thousands of Yuzhan cavalry, a black banner of a white yak fluttered in the wind. Beneath this banner, a scholarly figure dressed in an azure robe slowly ascended to the top of the hill. Buzz! Everyone paled at the sight of the tens of thousands of furnaces in front of Talas, the tens of thousands of busy craftsmen, and the steel defense line that was rapidly taking shape. The Tang people should have been completely unprepared when they were 18 li from Talas, but by the time they got close enough, the Tang people had begun to construct steel walls with unimaginable speed. At such a close distance, in such a short amount of time, a steel wall had appeared out of thin air. All the Tibetans were flabbergasted and completely unprepared. Prime Minister. Everyone turned to Daluan Ruozan, awaiting Daluan Ruozan's decision. The purpose of the cavalry's advance was to catch the opponent off guard and successfully ambush them. But now, the opponent was already prepared, so all the advantages were gone. Prime Minister, what should we do now? He's mobilized his defenses too quickly, and it seems like those steel walls are being constructed even faster than before. At this moment, a tall figure rode out from the rear, glancing at the slowly approaching Wang Chong with a hint of worry in his eyes. Daluan Ruozan said nothing, only slowly creased his brow as he gazed at that figure on the plains. He had been discovered by Wang Chong when he was 18 li from the city of Talas, but given the speed of the cavalry, by the time Wang Chong had received the news, he had already broken through to the 14 li range. Adding on the time it took for the second confirmation and the reaction time, by the time Wang Chong was able to confirm their identities, the 70,000 soldiers were already within 10 li of the city. At such a close distance, Daluan Ruozan had believed that when he arrived, he would at least cause chaos in Wang Chong's army, but the scene before him was completely different from what Daluan Ruozan had imagined. Chapter 901. Pass down my order. Without my order, all troops are forbidden to move. Daluan Ruozan suddenly opened his mouth, his eyes shining brightly. As for that person, you and I have both met him in the southwest. Given his abilities, isn't it normal for him to have such a performance? And, only by defeating him like this will it be more meaningful, right? As Daluan Ruozan spoke, he suddenly smiled. Hiya. With a slap on the back of his horse, Daluan Ruozan slowly rode down from the top of the hill against the fierce wind blowing from the city of Talas. At that moment, his gaze passed through the layers of space and fell on the 16 or 17-year-old boy in front of him. There was nothing in the world that could attract his attention except for the boy from the Tang dynasty who was riding over. Marquis, Daluan Ruozan is coming. In the distance, Li Sai's eyes flashed, and he turned his head to look at Wang Chong said next to him. Wang Chong looked into the distance and smiled. Daluan Ruozan had very few people with him, only 2 or 3, and none of them were top-notch experts. You stay here and wait for orders. I'll go see Daluan Ruozan. This, Li Sai hesitated for a moment. He was a little worried, but in the end, he nodded. Wang Chong's strength was getting higher and higher. Aside from experts at the level of great general, even brigadier generals were no match for him. There were not many people who could threaten him. Moreover, Daluan Ruozan was clearly here for Marquis. The southwest was where Daluan Ruozan had suffered a crushing defeat, and it was also where Marquis had risen to fame. The two were each other's mortal enemies. No matter what, this was their moment, and it was not appropriate for others to interfere. Hoof. The clattering of hoofs echoed over the plains, and the eastern side of the city of Talas was so still that one could hear a pin drop. This was a stark contrast to the rumbling of the Arabs to the west. No one spoke. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the two figures approaching them slowly. Even Gao Xianji, who was standing on the northeast wall, did the same. The appearance of the Uzun soldiers was an important chess piece on the battlefield of Talas. The sudden appearance of more than 70,000 Uzun cavalry was enough to completely alter the course of the battle. Even Gao Xianji was waiting for the war to develop. Pass down my order. Prepare the army and await my orders. Gao Xianji said. Yes, my lord. An Anshi Protectorate army officer turned around and left in a hurry. Dust billowed and yellow sand filled the sky. The two figures that weren't particularly tall attracted thousands of gazes. Separated by a distance of more than 500 feet, the two of them stared at each other from afar. Countless bolts of lightning shot out from the void. "Wang Chong, it's been a long time." A voice came from the other side of the dust kicked up by the warhorses. Daluan Ruozhen reined in his horse, a faint smile on his lips. "It's been half a year since we parted in the southwest. Congratulations on being promoted to Qixi Protector General in such a short time. Since the founding of the Tang dynasty, there hasn't been a Protector General younger than you." "Not at all. Since our last parting, Prime Minister has become even more mature and composed. Even my birds and the Anxi Protectorate Army in Suiye failed to find any trace of Prime Minister. Prime Minister can't be underestimated." Wang Chong smiled. While Daluan Ruozhen was sizing him up, Wang Chong was sizing up Daluan Ruozhen. Daluan Ruozhen had gotten thinner, much thinner, but he gave Wang Chong the feeling that he had lost much of his brilliance, that he had become much more reserved, and that he had become even more difficult to deal with. It had to be said that Daluan Ruozhen had chosen the perfect moment to place Wang Chong in an extremely disadvantageous position. "How could it be? Didn't you still find out in the end?" Daluan Ruozhen said, a faint smile on his lips. Even though they had met on the battlefield, even though they were enemies, Daluan Ruozhen had still maintained his composure and ease. "It's been half a year since we last met. In the royal capital's prison, this one has never stopped thinking about Lord Protector General. I remember that when we first met in the southwest, you gave me a great gift. The plains of the Ngari royal family are now devoid of people. The water and grass are lush and verdant, without a single cow or sheep. I no longer have to worry about not having enough water and grass in the winter and not being able to graze for 1,000 li. This is all thanks to Sire." Daluan Ruozhen is deeply grateful and engraved in his heart. "Thus, I have prepared a great gift for Sire this time." All was quiet, and Daluan Ruozhen's voice could be heard far across the plains. As he spoke, he still had a faint smile on his lips, and his tone was polite as if he was talking about the most ordinary of matters. But across from him, Li Sai, who was leading the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry in the rear, felt his heart thump. In the southwest, Wang Chong had dispatched an army to spread the plague on the plateau of the Ngari royal lineage, and Li Sai had been the one carrying out this plan. Daluan Ruozhen had said that the Ngari royal lineage was lush and verdant, and this truly was correct. But behind this was a barren land of 1,000 li, and the Ngari royal lineage had completely collapsed. As early as when he was in Wuxian, Li Sai had received news that the Yuzhan Empire was now a land of famine. Daluan Ruozhen was the prime minister of the Ngari royal lineage. He had said that he had been thinking about Wang Chong for half a year in the royal capital's prison, and the hatred in his heart was still unfathomably deep. The merciful do not command soldiers, and the virtuous do not command wealth. The path of war has always been a path of slaughter. Between friend and foe, there is naturally no such thing as mercy. As the ruler of the Ngari royal lineage, Prime Minister Wang Chong should understand this simple principle. In truth, I had originally planned for the plague to spread throughout the empire. Alas, it seems that your esteemed Prime Minister Wang Chong intervened and put an end to the plague. Wang Chong indifferently said, not even his eyelids twitching. No matter how many people from the Ngari royal lineage died, Wang Chong would not feel the slightest ripple in his heart. In truth, this was the cruelty and reality of war. If Yuzhan did not lose, it would be the Tang dynasty that would lose, and at that time, the losses would be even greater. Since Yuzhan and Meng Shizhao were the ones who had started the war, they had to bear the price. Protector General speaks correctly. Daluan Ruozhen has lost, and the general of a defeated army has nothing to say. Daluan Ruozhen grinned at these words. But whether this battle is won or lost, I hope that Protector General can maintain this attitude. Relax. The Tang dynasty will not lose. Wang Chong firmly declared as he gazed at Daluan Ruozhen 50-some zhang away, his starry eyes exuding a steely will. Buzz. The moment Wang Chong spoke, the atmosphere suddenly changed. The smile on Daluan Ruozen's lips suddenly vanished, his expression turning grim. These two foes of the Tang dynasty in Uzan stared at each other, their eyes flashing with electricity. Neither of them said anything, but they both felt a strong fighting spirit from each other at the same time. Protector General, it is best not to speak too early. Kindness is like water, not forsaking day and night. Everything is changing, and the Tang dynasty cannot always be the victor. After some time, Daluan Ruozen suddenly smiled, his gaze looking past Wang Chong to the black tide of Arab soldiers behind the two defense lines. Nothing in this world is impossible. The Tang dynasty will not lose. At least wherever I am, the Tang dynasty will never lose. Wang Chong indifferently said. His voice was neither loud nor soft, but it was brimming with confidence. In the entire world, almost no one dared to say such words to Daluan Ruozen, a wise minister. Even Huishu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoch had to treat him with respect. Only Wang Chong would dare to be so arrogant and confident in his presence. Is that so? Then this one looks forward to Protector General displaying his divine might like he did in the southwest and sweeping through our three great empires. Daluan Ruozen faintly smiled, but this time, he did not argue. Turning his horse around, he turned his back on Wang Chong and slowly rode back. Marquis, should we kill him? Xue Qianjun whispered into Wang Chong's ear. Wang Chong had brought 4 guards with him this time, and Xue Qianjun was one of them. During this entire process, his eyes had been fixed on Daluan Ruozen's back. Xue Qianjun had not taken part in the Southwestern War, but he had long ago heard of Daluan Ruozen's thunderous reputation in the army. There was no question that Daluan Ruozen was the greatest mastermind behind Uzan's long-distance assault. If he could kill Daluan Ruozen, he would be able to deal a heavy blow to Uzan. 500 zhang might be a little far, but with our speed, we still have a chance. There's no need. Wang Chong indifferently said, immediately rejecting Xue Qianjuan's proposal. Do you see that Uzan person holding the line behind Daluan Ruozen? Xue Qianjun subconsciously turned his head. With his back to the morning sun, it was difficult to make out this person's face, but from his attire, he was probably an Uzan commander, and his figure was particularly familiar. Xue Qianjuan's brow creased as if remembering something, and his eyes widened. That's Dusong Mangpoch. Wang Chong smiled and turned his head. Let's go. As Wang Chong left, Daluan Ruozen met up with Dusong Mangpoch. Prime Minister, should we kill him? Dusong Mangpoch lowered his head, his narrowed eyes bursting with killing intent. The battle between Dayan Mangpoch and the Triangular Gap had always been a sore spot in his heart. Although Daluan Ruozen and Wang Chong had only met for a brief moment, to Dusong Mangpoch, it felt like he had endured for countless centuries, his intense desire to kill. There's no need. Without even turning his head, Daluan Ruozen urged his horse forward. You can't kill him. Haven't you already experienced how meticulous his plans are? If he were so easy to assassinate, he would have died 1,000 times over by my hand. In addition, don't you see that Gao Xianji is already heading this way? Dazed, Dusong Mangpoch shifted his gaze forward, and as expected, he saw a familiar figure heading his way. I can only think of another way. Dusong Mangpoch sighed as he turned his horse and rode back to the army. Chapter 902. How is it? Outside Talas, Gao Xianji rode a red steed toward Wang Chong. Daluan Ruozen has long since colluded with the Arabs. Once we meet, they will quickly attack. Wang Chong calmly said. So between the Arabs and the Uzan, the first to be dealt with is the Uzan? Gao Xianji asked. Wang Chong had gathered nearly 80% of his forces on the Eastern Front. It was apparent that he was placing a great deal of importance on the Uzan. Not the Uzan. The first to be dealt with is the Uzun and the Western Turks. Wang Chong shook his head and corrected him with a smile. The Western Turks. Gao Xianji's body trembled, a look of surprise on his face. Rumble. Just when he was feeling confused, the earth began to quake. Behind the 70,000 Uzun soldiers, another cloud of dust soared into the sky. Countless soldiers were charging toward them. Buzz. In just a moment, a huge martial flag rose from the horizon, and a giant golden wolf bearing its fangs and brandishing its claws on the flag instantly leaped into everyone's eyes. Everyone's pupils constricted at the sight of this golden wolf, and the air became extremely solemn. Of all the kingdoms of the continent, only one faction would use this giant wolf as its symbol, the Western Turkic Khaganate. And in the Western Turkic Khaganate, only the most revered of individuals could use this golden wolf. The commander of these soldiers was a Western Turkic great general. Dewusili. Gao Xianji's expression turned extremely grave. Although there were many people that Gao Xianji had never met in his many years in the western regions, there was no great general that Gao Xianji did not know. The Celestial Wolf Great General. He was one of the best great generals of the Western Turkic Khaganate, an extremely experienced warrior. Even Biting Protector General Sis Hun had suffered defeat at his hands. More importantly, Wang Chong, be careful. The one who came is the Celestial Wolf Great General Dewusili of the Western Turks. The Black Wolf Yabgu Agudulan that you killed in Chishi was once his subordinate, a general that Dewusili had raised. Not only that, he had one of the three strongest cavalry forces of the Western Turkic Khaganate, the Celestial Wolf Cavalry. This force of cavalry isn't large, but it's extremely powerful. In the past, Biting Protector General Sis Hun was defeated by this force. Gao Xianji said solemnly. Wang Chang's eyelids twitched as he subconsciously turned his head to look at the huge gold wolf flag. Wang Chong was no stranger to the name of the Celestial Wolf Great General of the Western Turkic Khaganate, Dewusili. Among the kingdoms bordering the Tang dynasty, the Celestial Wolf Great General Dewusili was definitely one of the best generals. This person was definitely on the same level as Gao Xianji. But Wang Chong had never imagined that Dewusili would have a relationship with a good Ulan. So, it was a good Ulan's death that drew him out. Wang Chong's eyes flashed, his mind in turmoil. One was Dusong Mangpoj, one was Dewusili, and now. Wang Chong turned to the fiery red figure standing behind Daluan Ruozhen. This figure was no stranger to Wang Chong. It was none other than that inseparable from Daluan Ruozhen, that inseparable from Wuxia Wuzan. The tiny city of Talas had gathered Uzun and three great generals of the Western Turks. If the Abbasid Caliphate's governor of the East was added to the mix, the Tang dynasty would be facing four opponents of the great general level. The situation was extremely disadvantageous to the Tang dynasty. Not only that, Dewusili had also brought with him the Celestial Wolf Cavalry that stood at the apex of the pyramid of the continent. If he added the Arabian Mamelukes and his own 5,000 Wuxian cavalry, he had gathered the finest cavalry of all three worlds. Such a situation had never occurred in all of history. Something's wrong. Wang Chong's heart thumped as he turned to the distant hills. Behind Daluan Ruozhen, thousands of Uzun cavalry began to flow out. A special force of cavalry, muscular and plump, their armor stained with blood-red insignia, slowly rode out from the rear of the Uzun army. These cavalry were clearly one size larger than the Uzun cavalry around them, like a child standing before an adult. The storm-like aura on their bodies instantly attracted everyone's attention, causing everyone who saw them to feel an invisible pressure. The Mutri Great Cavalry. Li Sai blurted out as he stared at the black and red Uzun cavalry, all the muscles in his body instantly tensing up. Wang Chong said nothing, but his expression was just as grave. He knew that Daluan Ruozhen had come prepared, but Wang Chong had not expected him to bring with him the oldest and strongest of the Uzun cavalry. The Mutri Great Cavalry. It was rumored that more than 300 years ago, this was the strongest cavalry named after the Uzun Mutri Tsenpo. They shouldered the duty of protecting the royal capital and never left the Yuzhan capital. In his last life, even when the Arabian Empire invaded the plateau, the Yuzhan had not used them. On the entire plateau, this was the only cavalry force that bore the name, Great Cavalry. In terms of fighting power, this cavalry force was far superior to the Qinghai soldiers and white braves that Wang Chong had already destroyed. Wang Chong had never imagined that Daluan Ruozhen would have the ability to mobilize the Mutri Great Cavalry. The Celestial Wolf Cavalry, the Mutri Great Cavalry, the Wuxian Cavalry, and the Abbasid Caliphate's Mamelukes, the world's best cavalry forces had all gathered in one place. This was unprecedented in the history of cavalry. Buzz! A familiar pressure appeared in Wang Chong's mind, causing his heart to thump. A moment later, the Stone of Destiny's familiar voice resounded in his ear. Destiny is a strange interweaving. When the world's best and most outstanding things gather together, there will inevitably be a subtle reaction. Either they work together or they fight for supremacy. Whether the world will shatter or forge a new structure will depend on that special moment and the choice of destiny. The mission, Clash of Destiny, has been activated. The difficulty has been increased. Starting from now, for each Mutri Great Cavalry or Celestial Wolf Cavalry killed by the Wuxian Cavalry, user will be rewarded with 30 points of destiny energy, and for each Mameluke Cavalry killed by user will be rewarded with 50 points of destiny energy. For each Wuxian Cavalry killed by user will be deducted 100 points of destiny energy. The rewards and penalties for the mission will be calculated during battle. Notice: if the Mutri Great Cavalry, Celestial Wolf Cavalry, and Mameluke Cavalry are killed by soldiers other than the Wuxian Cavalry, the rewards and penalties will not be calculated. Wang Chong froze at this voice, a strange feeling emerging in his mind. He had not expected the Stone of Destiny to issue this mission at a time like this. The mission issued by the Stone of Destiny seemed to open up a new path for him to accumulate destiny energy on the battlefield, but that was not the case at all. Other than the Wuxian Cavalry, Wang Chong's strongest force was the Ballista Army. But according to the Stone of Destiny's final words, killing the Mutri Great Cavalry, Celestial Wolf Cavalry, or Mameluke Cavalry would not be considered a reward. This also meant that if Wang Chong wanted to obtain the destiny energy rewarded by the Stone of Destiny, he could only do so through the Wuxian Cavalry and cavalry duels. Not only that, each time the Wuxian Cavalry killed a Mutri Great Cavalry or Celestial Wolf Cavalry, they would be rewarded with 30 points of destiny energy and 50 points of Mameluke Cavalry. However, each death of a Wuxian Cavalry would result in a deduction of 100 points of destiny energy. So the Stone of Destiny has already taken into account the fact that all of them are wearing meteoric metal armor, which is far stronger than theirs. Wang Chong wondered to himself. Marquis, what do we do now? Li Sai turned his head to Wang Chong. Pass on my order. Prepare for battle. Wang Chong looked into the distance, smiled coldly, and then quickly rode off. At almost the same time, Gao Xianji passed on the order to return to the second defense line with Wang Chong. In the distance, tens of thousands of Yuzhan cavalry were stationed atop a long, tall hill, but they did not immediately move out. Many pairs of eyes followed Daluan Ruozhen to the rear of the army. There, a massive banner of a wolf on a blue background was leading the countless Western Turkic cavalry in a surging wave. At the front of this army was an exceptionally tall and muscular Turkic steed. He was riding a Turkic steed, and his sharp eyes made him seem like a war god of the 9 heavens. Behind him was an army of cavalry wearing silver armor covered in strange inscriptions. Unlike Yusang or any other cavalry, these cavalry were covered in barbs, and from a distance, they wore strange armor that made them seem like a savage silver wolf. Just a glance at them was enough to make one shiver in fear and dread. A woo! The howls of wolves resounded through the air as the tens of thousands of celestial wolf cavalry, each leading 10 some 4-foot-tall wolves, surged toward the hills. Dewusali, you really did come. Daluan Ruozhen stood at the top of the hill and heartily laughed. In this three-way alliance, the last of Daluan Ruozen's plans had finally appeared. Since I've been invited, how could I not come to this banquet to divide up the Tang dynasty? A thunderous voice resounded in everyone's ears. Ne let out a heaven-shaking howl, and in the howling winds, Wuxia took the lead and soared into the air, shooting through the air like a blazing flame to appear at the top of the hill. In the howling winds, Wuxia's position on the top of the hill seemed to stir up a storm, the enormous pressure forcing everyone to back away. Chapter 903. Wuxia, stop. Wuxia Wuzong grimaced as he moved to stand in front of Daluan Ruozen. At almost the same time, Dusong Mangpoch released a powerful energy to protect Daluan Ruozen and keep Wuxia's energy at bay. The Uzan and the Turks had never been a monolithic bloc. Long before the Tang dynasty had entered the western regions, the two sides had been locked in a fierce struggle. If not for the fact that the Tang dynasty had entered the western regions as a third party and taken control of the region, drawing the attention of both sides, the two sides would still be locked in a fierce struggle. Although the Uzan and the Western Turks no longer had many conflicts, if they succeeded in defeating the Tang dynasty, they would once more be enemies. In these circumstances, Wuxia probably did not mind killing Daluan Ruozen. Relax. Wuxia will not interfere. Daluan Ruozen waved his hand and indifferently said. As he walked out from Dusong Mangpoch and Wuxia Wuzong's protection, he confidently walked up to Wuxia. Urgent, welcome back. As Wuxia stared at Daluan Ruozen, his eyes wavered for a moment before finally bursting into laughter. Ha, good. Prime Minister, you're quite bold. With this long laugh, the atmosphere between the two sides suddenly became much gentler. The 5 prime ministers of the Uzan Empire were on the Western Turkic Khaganate's kill list. This was the result of a long-standing grudge, and no one knew the exact origins of it. But for Daluan Ruozen to be able to appear so calmly and fearlessly before him on their first meeting, Wuxia couldn't help but admire his boldness. Is that so? What's the situation with the Tang people? As Wuxia spoke, he looked across the hills and at the city of Talas in the distance. Even Wuxia's expression changed when he saw the 2 long steel lines of defense. What a fast reaction! Even with the ability of the Prime Minister, he couldn't break through their defenses. Great General, you should not be too careless. That fellow might be young, but he is the young Marquis that the Holy Emperor of the Tang dynasty personally bestowed upon him. Moreover, he was personally bestowed upon him the courtesy name of the Tang Emperor, the Son of Heaven's disciple. We've already lost to him several times. Even your black wolf Yabgu died at his hands. A mellow voice came from the side as Dusong Mangpoch walked up from behind. Wuxia didn't say anything, but he couldn't help but frown. The Uzan had only failed a few times, and they were not the Western Turkic Khaganate, so they were not necessarily incompetent. But when he heard the words Black Wolf Yabgu, Wuxia swallowed them back down. The defeat of a brigadier general like the Black Wolf Yabgu in the Battle of Chishi was still right in front of his eyes, and the Khagan's 4th prince had even been captured and extorted for 200,000 of their finest Turkic warhorses. The Uzan probably already knew of this matter. The two sides were evenly matched, and neither was much better than the other. There's no need for all of you to worry about the Black Wolf Yabgu. I came here for him in the first place. No matter what, I will personally kill that brat. Wuxia's eagle gaze quickly locked onto Wang Chong in the middle of the vast army of the Tang people. It seems like we've reached an agreement. Daluan Ruozen faintly smiled. This was the first time in history that the Uzan and the Western Turks, mortal enemies of the western regions, had worked together, an event of unprecedented grandeur. And before this, Daluan Ruozen had only communicated with Wuxia once through his eagle. Although he had heard of him, he had never met him. But at this moment, Daluan Ruozen was sure that in this battle, Wuxia would be his staunchest ally. What did the Arab say? Wuxia did not argue, and as he gazed into the distance, he got straight to the point. This battle appeared to be an alliance between the Uzun and the Western Turks, but the crucial factor was the Arabian Empire on the other side of the battlefield. It was precisely because of the Arabian Empire's invitation that they had agreed to this alliance. This was also the prerequisite for Wuxili's agreement. Otherwise, if the Western Turkic Khaganate helped the Arabs deal with the Tang dynasty, and the Arabian Empire won and turned against him, he would be shooting himself in the foot. The Turks were a nomadic people who moved widely, so they had a good understanding of the distant Arabian Empire. It was an existence even stronger than the Uzun Empire. Unless absolutely necessary, the Western Turkic Khaganate would never be willing to go to war with the Arabian Empire. Relax. Everything has been arranged. I've already sent a letter to the Arabian governor of the East. He has guaranteed that if we win this battle, he will work with our Uzun and the Western Turks to divide up the western regions. Daluan Ruozan indifferently said, his every action exuding the confidence of a strategist. But the Arabs have always been very ambitious. If they win and then turn against us, won't we be inviting a wolf into the house? What should we do then? Has Prime Minister considered these things? Wuxili went straight to the point. I've naturally considered these things. Daluan Ruozan softly chuckled, apparently having predicted that Wuxili would ask this question. Thus, I've already made an agreement with the Arabian governor of the East. If we win this battle, our three sides will continue to work together, enter Anxi, pass Qishi, enter Longxi, conquer the capital of the Tang dynasty, and divide up the central plains. Bang! Dusong Mangpoj, Wuxia Wuzong, and Wuxili trembled at Daluan Ruozan's soft laughter, massive waves stirring in their minds. Daluan Ruozan was proficient in many languages, and he had written all of his letters with Daluan Ruozan in Arabic. Dusong Mangpoj and Wuxia Wuzong only knew that the two sides had agreed to work together to deal with the Tang dynasty, but Daluan Ruozan had not said what they had discussed, so the two of them had no idea. The two had originally believed that their alliance would stop at defeating the Tang dynasty, but to their surprise, Daluan Ruozan had already made an agreement with the Arabian governor of the East to continue advancing after victory and divide up the Tang dynasty. Even Dusong Mangpoj and Wuxia Wuzong, two great generals of the Uzun, were deeply shocked by this idea. The Uzun, the Western Turks, and the powerful Arabian Empire. If they succeeded, they would form an alliance of unprecedented proportions. The alliance of the three empires would truly be able to shake up the map of the continent and completely alter the map of the world, achieving a feat that the Western Turkic Khaganate and the Uzun Empire had never accomplished before. Good. Celestial Wolf Great General Wuxili heartily laughed at Daluan Ruozan's words, his eyes bursting with excitement. Daluan Ruozan, I truly didn't misjudge you. You have guts. The Arabs have not yet stabilized their footing, and they haven't even defeated Gao Xianji, so they have even less understanding of the Central Plains. That Abu Muslim would never propose this sort of condition, so this is probably your idea. Wise minister, of the four famous ministers of the Uzun's four royal lineages, you are ranked first. I was right to agree to your alliance. Relax, I can agree on behalf of Ishbara Khagan. If we succeed in this battle, we will divide the spoils together. Tang! Heavens! Your Majesty! Bang! With Wuxili's order, the tens of thousands of Western Turkic cavalry, including one of the three strongest cavalry forces, the Celestial Wolf Cavalry, surged forward and leapt onto the hills closest to Talas. The illustrious Silver Celestial Wolf Cavalry of the Western Turks stood side by side with the black and red armored Mutri Great Cavalry of Yusang, one on the left and one on the right, exuding an unprecedented pressure. Translated by Hypersheep 325. At this moment, the two mortal enemies of the western regions, Uzun and the Western Turkic Khaganate, had truly joined forces. Clang! 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 Outside the walls of Talas, at the second defense line, tens of thousands of hammers were hammering down, each time creating a shower of sparks. The first time it smashed down, the steel defense line became a little stronger. One beehive after another was set up on the steel walls, creating a wall of death on the foreign battlefield to the west of the Tsong Mountains. Tens of thousands of steel walls, tens of thousands of beehives, and all kinds of ordnance. Only at this moment did Wang Chang's 2 months of preparations finally reveal themselves. But even so, the mood on the battlefield was not relaxed in the slightest. On the contrary, it was even tenser. Everyone could see the giant banner of the Golden Wolf on a blue background atop the distant hill, as well as the Western Turkic great general beneath it, his aura as powerful as a destructive storm. The tens of thousands of Mutri great cavalry and celestial wolf cavalry standing side by side like tigers eyeing their prey placed a heavy pressure on everyone's hearts. The sight of the Western Turks, the Uzun great general, and Daluan Ruozan standing side by side under the banner was suffocating. Behind them, the rumbling footsteps caused the earth to shake. The Arabs were still unhurried, approaching at an extremely steady pace. Behind the first defense line, the king of Donka and the thousands of Tang people's soldiers were concentrating on dealing with the enemy. But behind the second defense line, Wang Chong, Wang Yan, Li Sai, and Qing Qianli, the 4 highest commanders of the Tang dynasty, were standing in a row, none of them paying attention to what was behind them. The atmosphere was tense and oppressive. "Lord Protector General, how do you intend to fight this battle?" Gao Xianji asked, his eyes still fixed forward. The Anxi Protectorate army only had 10,000 some soldiers left, and even with the mercenaries in the city, it only had around 30,000, far fewer than Wang Chang's Qixi Protectorate. In terms of soldiers, there was no question that Wang Chong was the true commander of this battle. Gao Xianji was only a supporting figure. We'll deal with soldiers with arms and water with earth. This battle is unavoidable. The Tang dynasty has been silent for far too long, and it needs a battle like this to make everyone understand that on this continent of kingdoms, the Tang dynasty is still number one, still the strongest existence in the world. Wang Chong indifferently said, his eyes still fixed forward. These simple words caused Gao Xianji, Wang Yan, and Qing Qianli, the 3 commanders of the Tang dynasty, to widen their eyes, their minds stirring in great waves, a flame that had been dormant for a long time beginning to burn. Truly, the Tang dynasty had been silent for far too long. In the past, the great Tang, with just a few 100,000 soldiers, had dared to pursue the Turkic Khaganate north and south, suppressing all the surrounding countries and pressing into the capitals of the various kingdoms. With 8,000 cavalry, they had dared to chase the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Turkic Khaganate several thousand li away, even abandoning the Khagan's court. Chapter 904. Well said. Whether it's the Turks, Uzun, Arabia, or any of the surrounding countries, when has the Tang dynasty ever feared them? Lord Protector General, no matter what you want to do, we will do it according to your wishes. Be at ease and do it. I will do my best to cooperate with you. Gao Xianji said, his eyes flashing. In the 17-year-old Wang Chong, he could faintly sense the passion that he had lost for so long. So what if it was Uzun? So what if it was Arabia? In the past, hadn't he relied on his fearless drive to carve out a path through the complex environment of the western regions, ultimately earning the favor of the Holy Emperor and becoming Anxi Protector General, the war god of the western regions? Good. Wang Chang's confidence swelled at these words. One was the war saint of the apocalypse, and the other was the Anxi war god. Perhaps in terms of elite fighting power, the Tang dynasty could not compare to the Arabs, Uzun, or the Western Turks, but this combination was already extremely astonishing. When had the Tang dynasty ever used such an overwhelming force when conquering its borders? Moreover, the art of war was based on the principle of using the head-on to achieve victory through surprise. On the battlefield, there would never be so many surprise soldiers that one could rely on. A qualified commander had to be able to use his outstanding commanding ability to crush and kill his foe in a one-on-one, one-on-many battle. There was nothing fancy about this sort of battle. This was the ultimate embodiment of a commander's ability and talent in the art of war. This was a war of commanders. Zhang Ke, have you found out how many people there are on the other side? Wang Chong indifferently said as he gazed at the distant Uzun and Turkic army. Replying to Marquis, the Uzun have sent out their vulture army. We don't have enough rock eagles to get close, so we can only make a rough estimate. The Uzun have more than 70,000 while the Turks have more than 40,000, all of them elites. A young and childish voice came from behind him. Zhang Ke was kneeling behind the 4 Tang commanders, the rock eagle King Xiao Sha perched on his shoulder, his expression respectful. The Uzun's vulture army was extremely large. Flocks of vultures blotted out the sky, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. Coupled with the hunting falcons of the Arabian Empire, the birds of the Tang dynasty were in an extremely difficult situation. They could only rely on the master archers on the ground to intimidate the enemy birds and buy some space for the rock eagles to move. Even the number of 40,000 Turks had been obtained through Zhang Ke's Xiaosha's aerial reconnaissance. 70,000 Uzun soldiers and 40,000 elites of the Western Turkic Khaganate add up to around 120,000. That's enough. Since the Uzun and the Western Turks aren't willing to move for the time being, let's force them to fight. Wang Chong held his hands behind his back as he gazed at the distant hills, his body naturally exuding a powerful aura. The war saint of the Central Plains that had once dominated the world was gradually fusing with his current status as Qixi Protector General. The current Wang Chong did not seem like a 17-year-old at all. On the contrary, he exuded the aura of a dignified and domineering commander, causing Wang Yan and Go Xianji's eyelids to twitch uncontrollably. Old Senior Zhang, let's begin. Wang Chong said without turning his head. Zhang Shouji, obey. Order. With this order, the carriage began to move. As the leader of the tens of thousands of craftsmen, Zhang Shouji quickly boarded the carriage and rode away. Bang! With an earth-shattering boom, the 2 long steel lines of defense seemed to have a life of their own as they spread forward at an accelerated speed. Boom boom boom. One massive steel wall after another crashed to the ground, followed by a second, a third, a fourth. Thick plumes of smoke soared into the sky, immediately attracting the attention of the Arabs and Tibetans. What are these Tang people doing? Don't they already have 2 defense lines? Do they have some other trick up their sleeve? Dusong Mangpoj couldn't help but widen his eyes at this sight. Although he had only encountered Wang Chang's steel fortress once, Wang Chang's steel walls and fortress had left an indelible impression on this Uzun imperial great general. Dusong Mangpoj had suffered the greatest defeat of his life there. Dusong Mangpoj had instinctively become deeply wary of Wang Chang's steel defense line, and he had been traumatized by it. Daluan Ruozhen said nothing, but his brows slightly creased. He wants to completely separate US from Abu Muslim. Daluan Ruozhen squinted as he looked forward. If there was anyone in the world who understood Wang Chang's plans like the back of their hand, it was probably him. In the Southwest campaign, although Daluan Ruozhen had lost, he had also forced Wang Chong to the end of his rope. And in the few months he spent in the dungeon of the royal capital, he repeatedly reviewed, analyzed, and studied the battle in his mind. Daluan Ruozhen was well aware that Wang Chong would never do anything without a reason. His every move had to have a special goal. What do you mean? Weren't we working with the Arabs to attack the Tang dynasty from the east and the west? What meaning does he have in doing this? De Wuxia asked in confusion. Long before he had set off, Ishbara Kagan had sent a large amount of information on Wang Chong to his desk. But information was information, and the real person was the real person. De Wuxia still didn't have a very good understanding of this Qixi Protector General who had extorted 200,000 high-quality Turkic warhorses from the Western Turkic Khaganate. This is different. Daluan Ruozhen shook his head, his expression turning grave as he gazed at the roiling smoke in the distance. We are working with the Arabs to attack from the east and the west. This is an alliance formed by the forces of our 3 sides merging into one. We are one side, and the Tang dynasty is the other. If we allow them to use steel walls to separate us, the Tang dynasty will be in the middle to deal with us, and this war will become a three-way war. We will be one side, the Arabs will be another, and the Tang dynasty will be the third. Moreover, if we allow the Tang dynasty to stand in the middle and separate us, our ability to communicate with the Arabs will be affected, which is extremely disadvantageous to us. At the very least, we will have to use carrier pigeons to communicate with Abu Muslim. Daluan Ruozan said. So you originally hoped to immediately change your strategy and ally with the Arabs to attack the Tang people as soon as the battle turned for the worse? De Wuxia asked. I did have this thought, but it's no longer possible. Daluan Ruozan indifferently said, his eyes fixed on the distance. Wang Chong always had a way to use the simplest of methods to complicate a situation that should have been clear at a glance. Even his enemy, Daluan Ruozan, was filled with admiration for this. In the entire Central Plains, no one is stronger than him in the art of war. Everyone says that Wang Zhongxi is the war god of the Central Plains, but not even Wang Zhongxi can compare to Wang Chong in the art of war. Daluan Ruozan mentally sighed. In his many years as Prime Minister of the Ngari royal lineage, in a stalemate with the fierce tiger of the Tang dynasty, Zhangqiu Jinqiu, in the southwest, Daluan Ruozan had never felt such an intense threat from a single person. This sort of dazzling talent was worthy of praise, and it was also the sort of person that Daluan Ruozan had sworn to destroy. With this sort of person around, Uzan would never be able to rest in peace. Is it really impossible to circle around? Huishu Huaitsang reluctantly said as he looked into the distance. The more than 100,000 Western Turks and Tibetans and the 270 to 80,000 Arabian soldiers had been easily separated by a few of Wang Chang's steel fortresses. East and West had been separated, each fighting their own battles. This didn't sound like a three-way attack on the Tang dynasty, but a three-way attack on the Tang dynasty. It was rather difficult to accept. No. Daluan Ruozan shook his head, his eyes shooting a glance at the distant towering city of Talas. The terrain determines it. He's just taking advantage of the situation and using it. The geography of Talas is extremely complex. Although the entire region is a vast plain, it's actually quite difficult to deal with. Although the entire region is a plain, this plain is surrounded by thousands of ravines, barren mountains, and many deep ravines. The terrain is steep and difficult to climb. This was also the reason the Shur kingdom chose to build their city here. Daluan Ruozan calmly said. Talas was the battlefield he had chosen to crush the Tang dynasty and completely disintegrate the structure of the western regions. Daluan Ruozan had once carefully studied this place and knew it like the back of his hand. Behind the city of Talas are those dangerous cliffs, and there is only a very narrow path between the city and these cliffs. If we want to get through, we can only get through the plain in front of us. Now that Wang Chong has divided that area with 2 steel defense lines, he has completely cut off the path between us and the Arabs, turning passivity into initiative. If my guess isn't wrong, he will definitely leave a gap in those 2 defense lines and not build them to the end. Why? Surround 3 and destroy 1. Daluan Ruozan indifferently said, giving the answer in a single sentence. In the distance, as if in response to Daluan Ruozan's words, the 2 steel defense lines that had been madly expanding slowly came to a stop, leaving a narrow gap between them and the plain. That's enough. At almost the same time, Wang Chong stood in the middle of the army and waved his hand, giving the order to stop. Surround 3 and destroy 1. Leave a path for them. Little brother, that Daluan Ruozan isn't easy to deal with. By using this method to surround 3 and destroy 1, you probably won't be able to fool Daluan Ruozan. The clattering of footsteps and the clattering of armor came from the rear. Wang Chang's big brother, Wang Fu, had at some point walked up from the rear. The War of the Southwest. It's not that we can't fool him, but that he will definitely know. Wang Chong indifferently said, his eyes focused on that scholarly figure on the hill, his expression confident and confident. Chapter 905. Buzz. Wang Fu's brow rose when he heard Wang Chang's final words: the superior party attacks the schemes, and the superior party attacks the mind. The Wang clan was a clan of ministers and generals, and it possessed a deep and profound knowledge. Wang Fu knew all about the art of war and strategy. But his little brother would occasionally say something like this, and Wang Fu had no recollection of it even after searching his mind. Right now, whether Daluan Ruozhen is willing or not, he has to move. Wang Chong confidently said. Abu Muslim and Daluan Ruozhen were both top-class generals. The former had been able to force Gao Xianji into desperate straits, and there was no need to speak of the latter. Against these two, one needed to use all their strength and not be the slightest bit careless. But as the war saint of the Central Plains, Wang Chong still had a way to seize the initiative and seize the initiative. There was a saying in the art of war: encircle the enemy 10 times, attack 5 times, divide the enemy 10 times, and fight the enemy 10 times. If one didn't have as many soldiers as the enemy and had nowhere to retreat to, the best method was to rely on fortifications and force the enemy to attack. In a siege, the defending side would always have the fewest soldiers and the greatest advantage. And now, Wang Chong was urging Daluan Ruozhen to strike. This is an open scheme. He's not afraid that we won't fall for it, much less that we won't go. If we don't want to be completely divided and controlled, we have to attack. On the distant hills, Daluan Ruozhen looked down at the 3 imperial great generals as he slowly spoke. In many matters, he and Wang Chong were not enemies, but allies. Wang Chong knew what he was thinking, and he also knew what Wang Chong was thinking. This was a scheme without a scheme. A true scheme was one in which, even if the enemy saw through it, they would still be helpless and could only follow your plan. However, our forces are all here. When the 3 parties converged, they had a total of 400,000 soldiers and horses, which was far more than the Tang dynasty. There was no reason to delay. Send a signal to the Abbasid Caliphate. Prepare to attack. This time, our 3 empires will work together to destroy all the soldiers of the Tang dynasty in the western regions. This is also an overt plot. At the end, Daluan Ruozhen sneered, and his eyes shone with a cold light. The Abbasid Caliphate, the Western Turkic Khaganate, and the Uzun Empire, the 3 oldest empires of the western regions, had finally gathered to deal with the newcomer, the Tang dynasty. Completely uprooting the roots of the Tang dynasty in the western regions once and for all was also the only opportunity for the Uzun Empire to defeat the Tang dynasty in Daluan Ruozhen's plan. Wu! Daluan Ruozhen swung down his arm, and to the east of the city of Talas, the ancient and resounding yak horn resounded through the world. It was different from any previous war horn. The sound of this horn had a unique rhythm, like some kind of signal. Alright, the Uzun has sent a signal. At almost the same time, on the western side of Talas, the Abbasid governor of the East Abu Muslim slowly stood up from his seat, his eyes bursting with a light that made even the sun and moon lose their luster. Khaled. Your subordinate is here. A rough and loud voice, like that of a savage beast, came from the side. With this voice, an enormous shadow appeared, engulfing Abu Muslim and the 10-some Arabian soldiers around him. In the light of the rising sun in the east, one could clearly see that this was a fierce Arab general, at least 7 meters tall, even larger than the invincible great general Li Sai. His body was as thick and muscular as an iron pillar, and just by standing there, the earth seemed to sink a little. When this person stood in front of Abu Muslim, even the sun in the east seemed to be blocked out. And this giant of a man made the muscular Arabian soldiers around him seem like children in comparison. In a flash, all the Arabian soldiers raised their heads to see that enormous figure and began to retreat in fear, as if they had encountered a savage beast. The beast of Arabia, Khaled. Of all the Arab generals in the east, he was the most brutal, ferocious, bloodthirsty, warlike, and most terrifying existence. This was a humanoid behemoth that had been born to fight and kill. During the expansion of the Arabian Empire, the Beast of Arabia Khalid had set a record of fighting for 3 days and 3 nights in the conquest of Khorasan, killing as many people as he could. At the end of the conquest of Khorasan, he was the only one left to fight. But it was this man's savagery and viciousness that had defeated the last remnants of Khorasan's army. This savagery and viciousness had utterly crushed their will to fight, causing Khorasan to calm down. Khalid's physical strength, tenacity, savagery, and savagery were all things that no other Arab general could compare to. This Beast of Arabia was a bloodthirsty beast. Once he was released, he had to come back for blood. Take your Iron Beast army and kill the Tang dynasty. I need you to completely destroy their defense line. Abu Muslim said. Even in front of Khalid, the aura of the governor of iron and blood was as vast as the sun and moon, impossible to suppress. Yes, my lord. The Arabian beast Khalid's eyes shone with savagery as he turned his head to stare at the Tang defense line, which was still roiling with smoke and flames. Roar! Khalid looked to the east and gave a heaven-shaking roar. In a flash, a fiendish and murderous force of Arab cavalry, clearly taller and larger than the other Arab soldiers, stood out from the more than 200,000 Arab soldiers like a crane in a flock of chickens. In the middle of this army, a black steed more than 9 feet tall, twice the size of the other warhorses, neighed as it charged out of the formation and galloped to Khalid's side. Boom! Khalid did not say a word. His eyes flashed as he jumped onto the black divine chariot and sped away. Abu Muslim stood in the rear of the army, watching Khalid disappear into the distance. He quickly looked away and waved his hand. Give the signal to the Uzan and the Western Turks. Have the army move out. Bang! With Abu Muslim's order, war drums began to thunder from the direction of the Arabian Empire. These drums were extremely heavy, with 3 long beats and 2 short beats. They were completely different from normal war drums. Thumping could be heard through the battlefield in the center of the city of Talas to the distant hills to the east. Prime Minister, the Arabs have received the signal. An Uzan general turned to Dalen Trinling. Dalen Trinling grunted and nodded. I see it. Rumble. On the other side of the Tang dynasty army, to the west of the city of Talas, the Arab army that had been slowly advancing suddenly picked up its pace. If their advance had been like the crawl of a snail, it was now like the galloping of a ferocious beast. The entire region of Talas was like a small boat in a storm, fiercely shuddering. Marquis, the Arabs are attacking. Within the 2 steel defense lines, Xue Qianjun suddenly turned his head to Wang Chong, a nervous look in his eyes. Talas, which had been quiet for so long since yesterday, had once more begun to stir with the clouds of war. The wind was vast and mighty, and the airflow was surging. Everyone could only hear a series of dense, heavy war drums in their ears. And when the more than 200,000 cavalry suddenly began to move, they began to move with a momentum that could topple mountains and overturn the earth, placing an enormous pressure on everyone. The atmosphere of war instantly became 10 times, 100 times more intense. I understand. Wang Chong indifferently said, his words silencing Xue Qianjun. Xue Qianjun turned his head and saw that Wang Chong's hair was blown about in the fierce winds. Amidst the flickering light, Wang Chong's expression was resolute, composed, and unperturbed. Xue Qianjun felt like an invisible energy had been injected into his mind, and he silently turned around to stand guard at Wang Chong's side. The battle had begun. Daluan Ruozan, it's your turn. Wang Chong looked to the east, a bright light in his eyes. Move out. At almost the same time, on the hills, Daluan Ruozan's eyes flashed with cold light as he gave the order to attack. Rumble. On the eastern side of the battlefield, tens of thousands of Tibetan and Western Turkic soldiers surged down from the rolling hills like a dam had been breached. At that moment, heaven and earth were silent. Not a single sound could be heard. The entire world was silent, and only the sound of the warhorses could be heard. The Arabs, Uzan, and Turks all chose to attack at the same time. The three sides added up to a total of more than 400,000 elite soldiers. Facing an opponent of only slightly more than 100,000, they did not hesitate to choose the simplest, crudest, and most direct method. Attack. Gallop. The hooves of the warhorses thundered from both the east and west sides of the battlefield, each step seemingly stomping on the hearts of the Tang soldiers. More than 400,000 soldiers and horses came roaring from all directions like a raging wave. The winds howled and the warhorses howled. As the warhorses approached, the tense atmosphere on the battlefield of Talas began to multiply. But in front of the city of Talas, between the two steel walls, all was quiet. The tens of thousands of Chishi soldiers were tensed up, all of them tightly gripping their weapons, the veins on the back of their hands bulging as they nervously stared forward. The more than 100,000 soldiers were silent, but the tension was suffocating. Ready. Chapter 906. Buzz. The entire army immediately calmed down at this order, and then began to move. Clang clang clang. The first to react were the shield men. Countless well-crafted shields slammed into the ground, followed by the spearmen of greater and lesser valor, their spears aimed outward. Behind them, the cavalry unsheathed their sabers and swords, and with the creaking of gears, the 3,000 ballista teams on the east and west sides simultaneously loaded their ballista bolts and pulled open the gears. In this entire process, the movements of more than 10,000 people were synchronized, and even the creaking of the gears were identical, their precision inconceivable. Once all this was done, the energy exuded by the more than 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty suddenly changed. Like a dreadful war machine, it began to prepare for the dreadful harvest of war. Roar! A heaven-shaking roar came from the west side of the city of Talas. The Arabs had been the first to attack. Whoosh! The tens of thousands of Arab cavalry galloped forward, but in the very center of the Arab cavalry, the army parted to allow an incomparably tall figure on a divine steed to charge out. When he saw this figure, even Wang Chong couldn't help but widen his eyes. Tall. Especially tall. Li Sai's stature in the Central Plains, perhaps even in the Four Seas, would already be considered outstanding. But this person was even taller than Li Sai. Even though they were separated by a distance of several hundred feet, his sturdy figure still gave off an extremely strong visual impact. His warhorse was even taller than a man by two heads, an extremely rare sight even among divine steeds. This person was covered in black and red armor from head to toe, and he wielded two massive hammers in his hands. As he galloped on his horse, he madly howled, appearing just like the legendary mighty miracle god. Gid Hayden, Krahi. The mighty miracle god Arab general roared, his eyes exuding a frightening light as he charged forward. Behind him, tens of thousands of tall and equally ferocious Arabs roared as they charged, seething with killing intent. They were also Arabs, but compared to the Umar and his cavalry that Wang Chong's forces had defeated, these Arab cavalry were much stronger. In an instant, in front of the first line of defense, the shield-bearers of the Tang dynasty were resolute and able to hold on. But all the other soldiers of the western regions showed a look of fear. That's Khalid. A fierce Arab general. At some point, Qing Qianli had ridden up to Wang Chong's side, his eyes brimming with worry as he gazed at the distant Arabian giant. What are you doing? We fought with the Arabs for 2 months, and many of our soldiers died at Khalid's hands, and their deaths were extremely gruesome. Khalid liked to toss his opponents into the sky and then attack them from below. Therefore, almost none of his opponents had a complete corpse. General Shi tried to kill him before, but not only did he fail, he was heavily injured. General Shi was Shi Yuanqing, the third-ranked individual of the Anxi Protectorate Army, a Saint Martial expert whose strength was second only to Gao Xianji and Qing Qianli. If even Shi Yuanqing had been injured, one could easily imagine just how powerful this Khalid was. Is that so? Wang Chong coldly stared at the distant Khaled, his eyes flashing with thick killing intent. The beast of Arabia, Khaled. Wang Chong had never imagined that Abu Muslim would send out the #1 general of the Arab East for the first battle. What Arab general? He's only SOSO in my eyes. General Cheng, there's no need for you to worry. Call General Shi over. I have a way to have him kill this Khaled. Wang Chong held his hands behind his back and confidently said. Ah! Qing Qianli stared in shock at Wang Chong. He had only said these words to warn Wang Chong to be careful. His opponent was extremely powerful. But he had not expected Wang Chong to say that he had a way to turn defeat into victory for Shi Yuanqing and kill Khaled. This left Qing Qianli flabbergasted. If anyone else had said these words, he might have taken them to be joking. But Wang Chong's serious expression made it impossible to ignore his words. Protector General Wang, do you really have a way to kill Khaled? How will I know if I don't try? Wang Chong indifferently said. Shi Yuanqing arrived very quickly, and with the clattering of hooves, the gate opened. A stalwart figure riding a pure white steed appeared behind Wang Chong. Protector General Wang, you were looking for me. The stalwart figure dismounted and stopped at Wang Chong's side. His expression was stern, and his face seemed as if it had been chiseled by a knife or chisel. Wang Chong said nothing, only began to carefully examine this third-ranked officer of the Anxi Protectorate Army. Shi Yuanqing's injuries were not light, and before he had even gotten close, Wang Chong could already smell the thick stench of blood. As he carefully examined Shi Yuanqing, Wang Chong immediately noticed the blood-stained bandages on his body and arm. It seems like his injuries are very severe. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. When Gao Xianji had left the city, Qing Qianli and the other Anxi generals had followed him, but when Gao Xianji had been serving under Wang Chong, he had never seen this General Shi. It was clear that his injuries had been very severe and he was still recuperating in the city. Whoosh! As Shi Yuanqing steadied himself, Wang Chong suddenly stretched out a hand and grabbed Shi Yuanqing's arm. Shi Yuanqing's brow creased as he subconsciously tried to pull back his arm, but even with Shi Yuanqing's cultivation, he was unable to dodge. His arm suddenly went numb as Wang Chong grabbed it, rendering him immobile. Shi Yuanqing's shock was no small matter. His entire body trembled as he raised his head. Because Shi Yuanqing had been recuperating, he had never seen Wang Chong. Thus, he didn't have much of an understanding of him. But now, Shi Yuanqing realized that although this temporary Qixi Protector General was only 16 or 17, he was actually a Saint Martial expert, and his cultivation was no weaker than his own. General Shi, don't get distracted. I'll lend you one last hand to recuperate. Wang Chong's voice resounded in Shi Yuanqing's ear, and a moment later, a vast stream of stellar energy surged into Shi Yuanqing's body. Shi Yuanqing was stunned for a moment, but he immediately reacted and focused his mind, borrowing Wang Chong's stellar energy to recuperate from his injuries. The great yin-yang heaven creation art could not only absorb an opponent's energy and return it to them, it could also be used to recuperate from one's injuries. This was a new ability of the great yin-yang heaven creation art that Wang Chong's master, the evil emperor, had comprehended in his later years. However, this technique could only be used when the cultivator of the great yin-yang heaven creation art had reached an extremely high level of Saint Martial cultivation, and it could only be used on people whose cultivation level did not surpass the user's. Buzz! White steam began to rise from Shi Yuanqing's head, and as Qing Qianli and the other Anxi generals watched in shock, Shi Yuanqing's pale face began to rapidly turn red. His aura had also stabilized from its chaotic state. Lord Protector General, many thanks. A few moments later, Shi Yuanqing opened his eyes and stared in shock at Wang Chong. He only knew that Wang Chong's military prowess was decent, but he had never heard that Wang Chong's martial prowess was also this astonishing. A 16 or 17-year-old Saint Martial expert, even in the entire Tang dynasty, was probably an outstanding and transcendent existence. Wang Chong only faintly smiled. As he helped Shi Yuanqing recover, Wang Chong's complexion was a little pale, but it was nothing to worry about. With the power of the great yin-yang heaven creation art, he would need only a few moments to recover. General Shi, since you're helping someone, you should help them to the end. I have something else to give you. As Wang Chong spoke, he suddenly took a few steps forward and whispered a few words into Shi Yuanqing's ear. No one knew what Wang Chong had said, not even the nearby Qing Qinli. But everyone could see that after Wang Chong finished speaking, Shi Yuanqing turned around and stared in shock at Wang Chong. Lord Protector General, no words can express my gratitude for this great favor. If it really is as you say and we can kill that Khaled and avenge all the soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate army who died at his hands, this Shi will forever be grateful to you. Shi Yuanqing's eyes were red as he spoke these last words. The Anshi Protectorate army only had 30,000 some soldiers, but it had relied on these 30,000 some soldiers to suppress the kingdoms of the western regions and stop the attacks of Ozan and the Western Turks, creating a legend of the western regions. If not for their unity, mutual trust, and brotherly camaraderie, it would have been impossible to accomplish this feat. One could easily imagine Shi Yuanqing's emotions as he watched the hundreds of soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate army being flung into the air by the beast of Arabia and jolted into pieces. He's just a foreigner. There's no need for General Shi to view him so highly. Get ready. Kill him. Wang Chong is waiting for General to sing a song of victory. Wang Chong indifferently said. Kaiyil. Kaiyil. Just at this moment, the sound of galloping horses could be heard, and smoke and dust billowed. Waves of earth-shattering battle cries could be heard coming from the opposite side. While Wang Chong had been treating Shi Yuanqing's wounds, Khaled had led his Iron Beast army in a charge. At a distance of 60 to 70 zhang, everyone could clearly see that the Iron Beast army under Khaled's command was tall and muscular, glaring like a guardian deity. Their entire bodies, including their warhorses, were covered in thick armor that was 2 to 3 inches thick. All of them looked like mechanical beasts. Although the Bakr cataphracts led by Amur were famed for their powerful defenses and thick armor, they still paled in comparison to Khaled's Iron Beast army. There were only 10,000 some people charging together, but the waves of chi they stirred up were like a torrential storm, striking the walls of the steel walls and causing them to clatter and clatter. Even the air in front of the first defense line seemed to twist and blur. Kill them all. When Khaled was still several dozen zhang from the walls, he raised his saber and pointed it forward. That brutal and bloodthirsty roar was like that of a savage beast, making one's heart palpitate in fear. Wang Chong and Qing Qianli stood side by side, allowing the fierce waves of energy to sweep past them, their faces unperturbed. His gaze shifted to Chen Bin, who was standing in front of the first line of defense. Get ready. Chapter 907. Fire. Boom boom boom. The air trembled as thick crossbow bolts whistled through the air like a storm, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as they whizzed out. In a flash, the aura of death in the air became 100 times thicker. Ballistae. These were the strongest weapons of the Tang dynasty, weapons of slaughter that could intimidate all the clans, and in Wang Chong's hands, they were like the scythe of the god of death. In the first battle with Umar, the more than 70,000 Arab cavalry had crumbled to the dreadful edge of the ballistae. 1,500 ballistae could kill 10,000 Arab cavalry in a single volley. This was their dreadful power. Roar. Arab General Khaled gave a savage roar as he stared at the incoming ballista bolts, his eyes flashing with a fierce light. Boom! A pitch-black light erupted from Khaled's body and rapidly expanded. By the time it landed on the ground, it had transformed into 2 massive black and red war halos. The moment these 2 halos appeared, an invisible energy spread across the battlefield, engulfing the tens of thousands of Arab soldiers of the Iron Beast army. In the blink of an eye, the Iron Beast legion's auras more than doubled. A metallic stream of light quickly enveloped all the Iron Beast Legion's soldiers. Not only that, but thousands of miniature black and red war halos appeared beneath their feet, rapidly increasing their strength. The Iron Beast Halo. The Dark Blood Shield. Khaled had instantly used the two halos that had made him famous in Arabia. Unlike the other Arab generals, Khaled had two extremely high-level war halos. The former could greatly strengthen all the steel parts of the army warriors, including their armor, greatly increasing their defense and hardness, making them like iron beasts. This was also the origin of the name of Khaled's army. As for the latter, the Dark Blood Shield allowed the Arab soldiers under Khaled's command to fuse with their horses, transforming their blood energy into a shield that fused with their armor, strengthening their armor. It was these two halos that allowed Khaled's Iron Beast Legion to charge at the forefront in every battle, sweeping through everything before them. Boom! 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 Long crossbow bolts emitted an extremely dangerous aura as they shot out, each accurately hitting a soldier of the Iron Beast army. But in the next moment, something that shocked everyone happened. The tens of thousands of soldiers of the Iron Beast army suddenly formed extremely sturdy blood-colored shields. After the crossbow bolts pierced through the shields, they didn't stop there, piercing through the Iron Beast army behind them. However, it had only pierced through a single soldier of the Iron Beast army. In the past, the ballista bolts had been powerful enough to pierce through 7 or 8 soldiers, but this time, their speed and power had been greatly reduced. It was as if the ballista bolts hadn't pierced through bodies of flesh and blood, but human-shaped steel. Boom! 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 After the first wave of powerful crossbow bolts, the scene of the Iron Beast army collapsing did not appear. Only 1,000 or so of the tens of thousands of Iron Beast army soldiers had fallen. Some of them had managed to avoid being hit in their vitals and had even survived the volley of crossbow bolts. How is this possible? Behind the first line of defense, Chen Bin's expression shook violently as he jerked his head up. Around him, all the ballista soldiers also revealed shocked expressions. Everyone in the world knew of the power of the Tang dynasty's ballistae. They were the harvesting weapons of the god of death. In their first encounter with the Arabs, the 3,000 ballistae had already killed tens of thousands of Arab cavalry. But in the last volley, each ballista bolt had only managed to pierce through 2 or 3 people before running out of steam. Such a situation had never occurred before. For a moment, all the ballista soldiers behind the defense line were deathly still, so shocked that they couldn't speak. I forgot to tell you. Khaled's Iron Beast army has an extremely terrifying defense. Our ballista bolts managed to hit them in the previous battle, but the effect was very limited. A significant portion of the Arab soldiers that climbed up the walls were Khaled's Iron Beast warriors. Lord Protector General had to expend a great deal of his stellar energy to deal with these Iron Beast soldiers, which is why he was heavily injured by Abu Muslim. Qing Qianli walked up from the rear, his long hair rustling in the wind. These were the Arab soldiers that Abu Muslim had dispatched, and each one of them possessed extraordinary strength, a formidable foe of the Anshi Protectorate army. This battle was not as optimistic as had been imagined. Vice Protector General, there's no need to worry. He's just a brute. There's nothing to fear. And isn't there General Shi? Wang Chong waved his hand, his expression calm and relaxed. This beast of Arabia, Khaled, was truly formidable. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen his 2 halos reduce the power of the ballistae. But even the strongest beast was still a beast, and Wang Chong had several ways to deal with it. But the Qixi Protectorate was much stronger than it had been in the past. There was no need for him to personally participate in a battle of this level. Ready. At this moment, in front of the first defense line, Chen Bin's eyes flashed with a cold glint. He quickly responded and issued a second military order. Everyone, hear my order. Adjust the direction. Target the horse's legs. Joints. Fire. Without the slightest hesitation, Chen Bin changed his target from the soldiers of the Iron Beast army to the even weaker joints of the warhorses. Boom! 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 The ballista teams each had 500 soldiers, each taking turns to fire. A total of 1,500 ballista bolts were fired, filling the sky with a torrent of arrows. This time, the ballista bolts were fired from even lower positions. With a heaven-shaking boom, the results of the second round of adjustments were immediately apparent. Nay could hear the shrill whinnies of horses as thousands of legs snapped and countless Iron Beast army soldiers fell from their horses into the dust. Khaled's Iron Beast halo and dark blood shield could block the volley of ballista bolts, but they could not protect the weak joints of the warhorses. In the face of the terrifying might of the ballista, all the joints of the warhorses were as fragile as paper. Bang bang bang. Thousands of ballista bolts rained down, each one piercing through the legs of 20 to 30 warhorses. The Iron Beast army, which had been charging with ferocious momentum, was instantly thrown into chaos. Warhorse collided with warhorse, soldier with soldier, and the neighing and bellowing of horses filled the air. Not only that, as Khaled's Iron Beast army fell into chaos, the Arab cavalry charging from the rear were immediately hindered. Some of the cavalry, unable to dodge in time, crashed into the Iron Beast army soldiers in front of them. Dust churned and the sounds of collisions rang out as the entire battlefield descended into chaos. With just a minor adjustment, Chen Bin's ballista army had not killed a single soldier of the Iron Beast army, but it had achieved an effect that no amount of ballista bolts could achieve. Moreover, the entire Iron Beast army had been crippled in this attack. How could there be such a thing? Khaled, who had been so smug and crazed just a moment ago, stared at the ground littered with soldiers, the savage expression on his face instantly froze. In the first volley, only 1,000 some people had died, but in the second volley, the entire army had been wiped out, all the warhorses destroyed. Without their warhorses, the Iron Beast army's strength had dropped by at least half. At best, it was just a few formidable infantry soldiers, far from being an invincible army. Fire! Just as all the Iron Beast army soldiers fell, Chen Bin's expression was cold as he once again gave the order to fire. However, this time, the target was not the warhorses, but the tens of thousands of Iron Beast army soldiers. Damn it! I'll tear you apart! Khaled roared, his entire body exploding with savagery. Slapping his horse, he shot toward the first defense line of the Tang dynasty like a black and red meteor. As Khaled charged forward with thunderous speed, Wang Chong turned his horse around and began to ride toward the second defense line. No matter how ferocious Khaled was, he was just one person. To Wang Chong, the moment the tens of thousands of soldiers of the Iron Beast army were slain, his plan was complete. No matter how formidable the Arabs were, they would still have to deal with his impenetrable defense lines. At the very least, they would not be able to break through these defense lines for a very long time. Next up are the Turks and Tibetans, Wang Chong said. As this thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind, he turned his eyes to the east of the city of Talas. A wolf howl resounded in his ears as the situation on the eastern side of the battlefield underwent an astonishing transformation. Under Wang Chong's gaze, the rising sun in the east suddenly saw tens of thousands of giant wolves charging out from behind the Uzan cavalry and Arab cavalry. These wolves were all baring their fangs and moving extremely quickly. In just a short while, they had already passed all of the cavalrymen. Like a surging tide, they covered the sky and the earth with the power to topple mountains and overturn seas. Wang Chong's vision was filled with these massive wolves. Turkic wolves. As this thought flashed through Wang Chong's mind, his gaze traveled across the plains to the hills on the other side. Under that enormous banner of golden wolves, Wang Chong could see a figure with bright eyes and a hawk-like gaze, a storm of wolves. Only the celestial wolf Great General Dewusili of the Western Turkic Khaganate could bring so many wolves. Caw! Before the first wave subsided, another wave rose. Right behind the overwhelming pack of wolves, waves of baby-like cries came from above. Wang Chong raised his head and saw that the sky was filled with dark clouds of Wuxian vultures, flying down toward the second defense line. Chapter 908. Daluan Ruozhen. Wang Chong didn't need to look to know that this must be Daluan Ruozhen's order. Of the two commanders on the eastern battlefield, one used a pack of wolves and the other used a vulture. They launched their own probing attacks from different directions. Whether it was wolves or vultures, these beasts of the plains and highlands, to de Wuxia and Daluan Ruozhen, they could have as many as they wanted. No matter how many were injured or killed, they wouldn't feel the pinch. But the two of them could use this method to probe Wang Chong's defensive capabilities on the eastern battlefield. Since that's the case, then as you wish. Wang Chong looked at the two bright eyes on the opposite hill, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. No matter what de Wuxia and Daluan Ruozhen were planning, it was simply wishful thinking to rely on tens of thousands of wolves and vultures to break through his defensive line. Even if they were to probe, the two of them were destined to be unable to find out anything. 20 zhang. 10 zhang. Release. In a flash, a calm voice suddenly sounded from behind the eastern defensive line. The next moment, everyone heard a buzzing sound, like a swarm of bees flying and flapping their wings. Just as the wolves and the vultures in the sky were about to swoop down, countless densely packed holes on the steel walls opened up. Cold light flashed, and hundreds of thousands of arrows burst out from the holes like rain. A woo! A huge green wolf charging at the front couldn't dodge in time, and a bloody hole appeared on its forehead. In an instant it was nailed to the ground by 6 or 7 sharp arrows. And like the opening of the prelude to death, hundreds of thousands of arrows whistled down from the sky above the huge green wolf, nailing the countless wolves within a range of 70 to 80 zhang in front of the second defensive line to the ground. It wasn't just that. Pooh! 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 In midair, vultures cried out in alarm one after another. Their necks, wings, and abdomens were pierced by the rain of arrows, and they fell down like rocks. Below them, they could clearly see the warriors of the Tang dynasty holding huge rectangular steel boxes. The countless holes on the boxes were aimed at the sky. However, such a small change instantly turned the sky into a zone of death. The wolves howled miserably and the vultures cried out in alarm. In just a few breaths of time, the vast sea of wolves and vultures that blotted out the skies in front of the second line of defense were instantly cleared out. As far as the eye could see, there were corpses of these wolves and vultures everywhere. The entire battlefield suddenly fell silent. Buzz! Seeing this scene, de Wuxia's eyelids twitched and his expression changed. What is this? De Wuxia's mind was in turmoil. As he stared at the distant youth, he felt like the world had turned upside down. Although he had come at Daluan Ruozhen's invitation with the goal of destroying the Tang dynasty's remaining forces in the western regions, he had never fought with Wang Chong before. De Wuxia had never seen such a terrifying steel contraption that could unleash hundreds of thousands of arrows in an instant. This had completely overturned his understanding of the bow and arrow. Nearby, Daluan Ruozhen's eyes were also in turmoil. When he had fought with Wang Chong in the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had only prepared one steel wall after another. In the face of the hundreds of thousands of Mengshi, Yusang army, he could only passively defend. He had never had so many terrifying killing weapons. Daluan Ruozhen had long ago heard of the beehive in the royal capital's prison, and Wang Chong had also used it against Dian Mangpoch. But hearing it and seeing it were two completely different things. Everyone on the hill felt a deep shock that came from the depths of their souls as they recalled the rain of arrows that had soared into the sky and were as boundless as the sea. Release. Similar voices could be heard not only from the eastern side of the battlefield, but also from the western side of the city of Talas, behind the first defense line. Bzzz. Hundreds of thousands of arrows exploded into the air, engulfing the Iron Beast army and the charging Arab soldiers. Release! 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 Tens of thousands of beehives had been installed on the steel walls, each one manned by a soldier. A rain of hundreds of thousands of arrows blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Like a tidal wave, they whizzed out continuously. Although these bolts were far less lethal than ballista bolts, and a significant portion of them were blocked by the Arab armor, when the number of bolts reached a terrifying level, their power was still astonishing. Squelch, squelch, squelch. The sounds of arrows stabbing into bodies could be heard from the western side of Talas. War horses and cavalry were covered in arrows before they could even reach the first defense line, and after charging a certain distance, they dropped to the ground. In just a few short moments, the area in front of the first defense line was covered in corpses, piling up into mountains. Fire! Atop the transport carriage, Chen Bin's eyes were cold and aloof as he swung his sword again and again. Wave after wave of ballista bolts were unleashed, each one creating a massive rain of arrows that claimed the lives of many Arab soldiers. The Tang dynasty had expended vast amounts of resources to produce ballista ballistae, a symbol of the highest level of craftsmanship, and on this foreign battlefield, they were displaying their greatest might. In a few short moments, tens of thousands of Arab elites had fallen on the battlefield. But at this moment, the ferocity and fearlessness of the Arabs were on full display. Despite the ballista and beehive bolts, despite the large number of Arabs dying at the first defense line of the Tang dynasty, the Arab army in the rear was still surging forward like a vast ocean. There was no fear of death on their faces. On the contrary, they seemed to be basking in some sort of immense glory. The Arabs were naturally warlike, and dying on the battlefield was an honor. To them, dying on the battlefield was equivalent to returning to the embrace of God, an extremely high blessing and glory. Thus, the Arabs were even stronger and more ferocious than the Uzan or the Turks. Even Wang Chong couldn't help but widen his eyes in shock at the sight of this Arab army charging forward. Before the first wave had even subsided, another wave had risen. Just when the Arabs were charging, tens of thousands of Uzan and Western Turkic cavalry roared as they charged forward. The deaths of tens of thousands of wolves and Turks had failed to strike fear into the hearts of the Uzan and Western Turks. Huishu Wizang, besides the Mutri great cavalry, send out everyone else. Duluan Ruozan sat atop an Uzan steed in the howling winds, his eyes fixed forward with a determined expression. There was no need to doubt the strength of the Tang people. In a war with the Tang dynasty, any attempt to avoid losses or defeat the Tang dynasty by paying a small price was impractical and extremely childish. War had sacrifices, and in this battle of Talas, Duluan Ruozan had already prepared for the worst. As long as he could destroy the Anxi Protectorate army in Qixi Protectorate and strangle Wang Chong, all the sacrifices would be worth it. The three-way alliance and decisive battle against the Tang dynasty had to be carried out no matter what. There was no way the Tang dynasty could survive. Zabo, have you finished assembling everything in the back? Duluan Ruozan took 2 steps forward, not even turning his head as he spoke. Everything's ready. We're just waiting for Prime Minister's order. A voice came from the back. Duluan Ruozan nodded. Inform the Arabs to move together. In addition, begin. Yes. A figure quickly left behind Duluan Ruozan, vanishing behind the hills. Rumble. Gales howled and warhorses galloped as tens of thousands of Tibetans and Western Turks charged forward. Awoo. Tens of thousands of wolves once more charged out from the rear of the cavalry, but unlike the first time, when they were still 200 some zhang from the second defense line, the situation suddenly changed. Buzz. In a flash of light, all the Tibetans and Western Turks reached under their horses and took out round and heavy shields. Kill. Destroy them. Occupy the western regions. Kill them. The Uzan and Western Turks did not speak the same language, but at this moment, they seemed to be working together as one army. Their bellies pressed against the backs of their horses, the round shields in their hands raised in front of them like umbrellas, shielding their horses and the majority of their vitals. All the Tang dynasty soldiers behind the second defense line grimaced at this sight. Whether it was the vultures, the wolves, or the round shields, the Uzun and Western Turks had clearly come prepared, fully prepared. Ready. With a clang, Su Ke unsheathed his sword, his cold voice echoing through the defense line. Following Su Ke's order, the 1,500 ballistae behind the second defense line creaked and began to adjust their trajectories. Under the rising sun, they slowly raised their sharp arrowheads and began to take aim at the charging Uzun and Western Turks. But at this moment, Su Ke sensed a flash in his eyes and immediately closed them. Sunlight. Su Ke's heart chilled and his face paled. He hadn't noticed a moment ago, but just as everyone was preparing to take aim, the sun rose from the east, right in front of everyone's eyes. This was also the moment when the Uzun and Western Turks would attack. Could Daluan Ruozan have even calculated this? Su Ke suddenly felt a deep apprehension. Chapter 909. Lower your eyes and avoid the sunlight. Pay attention to the shadows on the ground. A familiar voice came from the rear. At this moment, Wang Chong suddenly spoke. Upon hearing this voice, everyone immediately fell silent and adjusted their gazes. Su Ke also rapidly calmed down. Change direction. Pay attention to the area below the horse's belly. Get ready. Su Ke swiftly issued a string of orders, but just as he raised his sword and prepared to swing down, there was a shrill whistle as a fist-sized black shadow rapidly expanded on the ground behind the second defense line. Before anyone could react, a massive rock the size of two men hugging each other fell from the sky, smashing into the rear of the ballista army. Stone bullet. Mounted on the white-hoofed shadow, Wang Chong's eyes widened at the sight of this massive rock. Careful. But before Wang Chong could issue a warning, a heaven-shaking explosion came from behind him. Wang Chong turned his head and saw thick smoke and flames roiling behind him. On the ground, a thick black liquid was flowing and burning. The flames and smoke had come from this black liquid. Arabian kerosene. Wang Chong's pupils constricted as he immediately recognized what it was. Countless thoughts flitted through his mind, and Wang Chong suddenly understood. Catapults. The Arabs and Uzun had both prepared these things to deal with him. Release. In the east of the battlefield, hundreds of tall catapults stood behind the hills that could not be seen from afar. Next to these catapults, the Uzun soldiers were still removing the wooden components of the catapults and anxiously assembling them. The Uzun plateau was dominated by grasslands, with very few tall trees. All the large lumber used to make these catapults had been purchased by Daluan Ruozan from the Mengshi Zhao merchants. The structure of Wang Chong's city of steel, its internal connections, and its modular construction were still a secret to all the countries. But Daluan Ruozan had obtained inspiration from this and thought of a method to make the catapults modular, which he had transported all the way to Talas. The ballistae of the Tang dynasty were renowned throughout the world, invincible and unstoppable on the battlefield. And these constantly assembled catapults were the weapons that Daluan Ruozan was using to deal with Wang Chong. Release. With just one command, huge rocks immediately soared into the sky from behind the catapults. They drew huge parabolas in the air, passing over the hills and the eastern battlefield, and smashed heavily towards the ballistae behind the first defense line. Boom! One ballista, unable to dodge in time, was struck by a massive stone ball, pulverizing the troop transport beneath it. Pieces of steel, ballista bolts, and even the wheels of the ballista were hurled into the air. The 5 ballista soldiers around the ballista were flung into the air by the immense force, flying like ragdolls. Boom! Another massive boulder crashed down, and 2 Chishi soldiers screamed as they were crushed into meat paste by the falling boulder. 1 boulder, 2 boulders, 3 boulders, 4 boulders. The sharp whistling sound in the sky rang out incessantly. Lifting his head and looking up, he saw hundreds of boulders tumbling in the sky, smashing toward him one after another. Release. At almost the same time, on the western side of the battlefield, behind the more than 200,000 Arab soldiers, massive and imposing catapults more than 10 meters tall were lined up. In front of these catapults, an Arab general, his eyes sharp and vicious, swung down his arm. Boom boom boom. Massive metal balls howled into the air, crossing more than half the battlefield to land between the first and second defense lines. As the metal balls hit the ground, they shattered into countless shards, spilling the thick black Arabian kerosene onto the ground and instantly igniting into flames. One giant metal ball after another fell to the ground, instantly transforming the area behind the first defense line into a sea of fire. In a few short moments, the situation had become extremely disadvantageous to the Tang dynasty. Boom boom boom. Taking advantage of this chaos, the vanguard of the Arab army succeeded in getting close. One Arab soldier after another howled as they slammed into the steel walls and heavy shields at the very front. All the steel walls and heavy infantry shields trembled violently, letting out a series of ear-piercing metallic roars. Charge! Kill them all! All infidels must die! Roars in Arabic resounded through the sky. On the eastern side of the battlefield, the thundering of hooves allowed the Uzun cavalry and Western Turkic cavalry to rapidly approach under the barrage of catapults and the blinding sunlight. And at the very front of these cavalry, the giant wolves were already lunging forward. Marquis, what do we do? The Uzun are aiming at the ballistae. Su Kei's anxious voice came from the front. The situation on the battlefield had changed far too quickly. A moment ago, the Tang army had held the upper hand, but a moment later, the more than 100,000 Tang soldiers had fallen into an extremely disadvantageous position. Can we see where the enemy's catapults are? Wang Chong rode on the back of the white-hoofed shadow, his long hair flapping in the wind. Rock after rock continued to fall, some of them just a few paces from Wang Chong, the shockwaves stirring up by them even striking the white-hoofed shadow. But Wang Chong remained extremely calm. I can't see it. All the catapults are hidden behind the hills. We can't fire at them. Su Kei anxiously said. On their way from Chishi to Talas, they had passed through those hills. It was precisely because they had gotten so close that they had been able to catch Umar and the Arabs off guard. But none of them had expected that Daluan Ruozan would be using these hills to deal with them. The catapults were in the rear, essentially invincible, and Daluan Ruozan's formidable calculative abilities allowed him to constantly adjust the direction of the catapults, allowing them to strike at the ballistae. And the weakness of the ballistae being unable to shoot as fast as the catapults was now exposed. Marquis, what do we do? Chen Bin's anxious voice came from behind the first defense line. Large iron balls filled with kerosene kept falling down, and a large number of fire holes burst out. Thick smoke and heat waves were everywhere. Many people were even hit by the kerosene, and their bodies were set ablaze. The roiling smoke even affected the vision of the ballista army. This kerosene was even more powerful than the rock attacks of the Uzun army. Daluan Ruozan. Wang Chong's eyes flashed with cold light as he looked across the first defense line, at the fierce eyes of the white yak atop the hill. If one were to say that Daluan Ruozan had not come prepared, that all of this was just a coincidence, Wang Chong would never believe it. It was obvious that Daluan Ruozan had prepared for a very long time to deal with him. At the very least, Daluan Ruozan's catapults had not been prepared in a short period of time. Marquis, I'll lead the Wuxian cavalry in a charge and destroy those catapults. A tightly clenched voice came from the side amidst the torrential rain of rocks. Li Sai's eyes were blazing with killing intent. The situation was urgent, and Daluan Ruozan had at least several hundred catapults, all of them out of range. The rolling hills were the best protection for the catapults. The situation was rapidly becoming dangerous for the more than 100,000 Tang soldiers. There's no need. At this moment, a voice rang out. As the winds howled, Wang Chong listened to the crashing of the catapults and the screams of the army. His face remained resolute and extremely composed. The current situation is not that dangerous. Moreover, De Wuxia, Huishu Wuzong, and Duso Mangpoj are all on the hills. How do you plan to get through? Li Sai's expression froze, and he froze on the spot, unable to speak. De Wuxia, Huishu Wuzong, Duso Mangpoj, Uzun, and the best great generals of the Western Turkic Khaganate were all gathered here. They were like a mountain, an insurmountable chasm. This natural moat was even more difficult to cross than the hills. Although Li Sai would eventually become an imperial great general with the title of invincible great general, that was a matter for the future. At the very least, he had not reached that level yet. In fact, he was still half a step away from breaking into the Saint Martial realm. If he encountered 3 powerful great generals, he would be doomed. But my lord, are we just going to watch Marquis? Li Sai spitefully said, his heart filled with unwillingness. Wang Chong said nothing, his eyes fixed on that azure-robed figure on the hill, countless thoughts flitting through his mind. Dalawan Ruozan had made far more preparations than he had imagined. The Arabian ballistae were renowned throughout the world, and if Dalawan Ruozan had been paying attention to him this entire time, he would have gathered a great deal of information on them. These catapults were hidden to be used against him. But no matter how much preparation Dalawan Ruozan had made, he was destined to fail. Because he was far from the only one who had prepared for this battle. Senior Zhang, get ready. Wang Chong suddenly said. Yes, Marquis. An elderly voice came from behind him. Stunned, Li Sai turned his head and saw that Zhang Shouji, dressed in a black robe, was standing on a carriage. At some point, he had appeared behind him. After giving a respectful bow, Zhang Shouji did not even look at Li Sai. Instead, he led his 10 some personal disciples toward the towering city of Talas, quickly vanishing through the city gates. Chen Burang, you go as well. In this battle, we need your strength to deal with the Arabs and Uzun. Chapter 9-10. Understood. Chen Burang had a solemn expression on his face, apparently waiting for Wang Chong's order. I will definitely not fulfill Marquis' request. Chen Burang respectfully bowed and then turned around. Summoning his horse, he galloped off into the distance, stirring up a cloud of dust as he followed Zhang Shouji into Talas. With everything taken care of, Wang Chong's gaze shifted, and he quickly returned to his senses. All infantry and axemen, pay attention. Clear out any wolf pack that breaks in. Beehive teams, get ready to clear out the area. Ballista teams, fire at will. Wait for the order to retreat. Xue Qianjun, pass on the order to the first defense line. Bury the Arabian kerosene in sand and immediately extinguish the fire. Craftsmen, set up bunkers. Logistics teams, get ready to repair the ballistae. In a few short moments, Wang Chong issued a string of orders. His eyes were calm and wise, as if nothing in the world could shake his mind. At the same time, the disorderly army, under Wang Chong's orders, began to adopt a series of effective tactics. A hunting team was quickly formed to snipe the green wolves and kill any Turkic wolves that got past the defense line. Meanwhile, a sand team was tasked with extinguishing the fires and quickly began to bury the black kerosene. The raging fires and smoke were quickly brought under control. Although the flames were still burning, they were several times weaker than before and no longer as intimidating as before. More importantly, the clear and effective orders immediately calmed the army. Although people were still being crushed to death or burned to death, even the mercenaries of the western regions who had fought alongside the Chishi Protectorate for the first time had calmed down. Do you see? In order to deal with the Tang people, the Arabs and I prepared for so long, but he only needed a few moments to calm down an army of more than 100,000. Even those scattered mercenaries from the western regions were subdued by him. How many people can command a battle formation and react so quickly? To the east of the battlefield, on a high hill, a strong wind blew. Daluan Ruozen stood with his hands clasped behind his back, silently looking into the distance. A profound light flashed in his eyes. Even though Wang Chong was his opponent, Daluan Ruozen could not help but gasp in admiration and amaze at his talent in the art of war. Even though the Ngari royal lineage had been destroyed, even though more than 200,000 cavalry had been buried in the southwest, Daluan Ruozen had nothing to say about his loss. Some people's talents were like the bright sun in the sky. They were so dazzling that no one could ignore them. In fact, as his opponent, he couldn't help but feel that it was a blessing to be able to fight against such an opponent. It's a pity that we're still opponents. With such a person around, neither the Uzan nor the Western Turks can rest in peace. This is why I contacted General to deal with him. This kind of person must die. Dewusili said nothing, only turned to look at the carefree Daluan Ruozen with a strange look on his face. Since they were mortal enemies, it was naturally best to kill each other. To Dewusili, someone like Daluan Ruozen who admired his opponent on the battlefield was extremely strange. This was not Dewusili's style. Prime Minister is truly an interesting person. Dewusili smirked, the corners of his lips slowly curling up as he looked into the distance, a hint of cruelty in his eyes. I've never respected my opponents. I only like to kill them. Whoever makes an enemy out of me will only meet a dead end. Only a dead enemy is my favorite enemy. Daluan Ruozen glanced back, faintly smiled, and said no more. In the end, people were different. A rock was different from an eagle, and a dragon was different from a tiger. In the end, Dewusili was a fierce general, not a wise one. Pass on my order. Increase the intensity of the attacks. In addition, bring the Tang dynasty's steel walls into the range of our attacks. Daluan Ruozen lightly waved his sleeve, not even turning his head as he gave his order. Yes, Prime Minister. A messenger hastily departed. Daluan Ruozen gave a satisfied nod. Everything was on the right track. Uzan's rain of rocks and the Arabs' kerosene were already showing their effects, and the Tang people's attacks had been suppressed. If everything went as expected, the Tang dynasty was certain to lose this battle. Prime Minister, look! Suddenly, a voice rang out, quickly attracting everyone's attention. It was one of the Uzan generals at Daluan Ruozen's side. He had raised an arm, but his finger was not pointing at the battlefield, but at the towering city of Talas. In a flash, Daluan Ruozen, Huishu Wazang, Dusong Mangpoch, and even the nearby Dewusili were all startled and subconsciously looked in the direction of his finger. As they climbed up the mottled, smoky, and majestic walls of Talas, they could clearly see the gleam of steel in the southeast corner of the walls. Under the light of the morning sun, the Tang dynasty soldiers on the walls were busily setting up rows of strange and complicated steel components. What are they doing? Dewusili subconsciously asked. Even though he was one of the Western Turkic great generals who had participated in many battles and even defeated Biting Protector General and Sis-Hun, he had never seen anything like this before. But Dewusili had never seen anything like this before. I don't know. Daluan Ruozen only replied with a single sentence, his eyelids constantly twitching. There was no such thing in his records, but this instinctive reaction gave Daluan Ruozen a bad feeling. No matter what those steel installations on the walls of the city of Talas were, they were nothing good for Uzan or the Western Turks. That's impossible. Could it be that he's prepared? As this thought flashed through his mind, Daluan Ruozen's face paled. He could not believe that Wang Chong had predicted this battle and prepared many catapults to deal with him. But just as this thought flitted through his mind, Daluan Ruozen heard a massive boom. Rumble. A massive black silhouette flew over the hills, over the heads of the three great generals, and toward the back of the hills. On the hills, Dewusili narrowed his eyes, a sharp light flashing through them. Clang! A saber clattered like a dragon. No one could see how Wuxia had attacked, but a moment later, a dazzling saber glow soared into the sky like a waterfall. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the black silhouette flying over their heads several dozen zhang away was cleaved in two and exploded into countless fragments that rained down from the sky. But a moment later, a heaven-shaking explosion came from behind him. As Wuxia swung his scimitar, a catapult that had just finished loading and was about to be thrown was instantly smashed apart by a massive rock falling from the sky. Daluan Ruozhen, Wuxia, Huishu Wizang, and Dusong Mengpoj all paled. Catapults. At this moment, everyone understood. The steel equipment Wang Chong had set up on the walls of the city of Talas was actually a catapult, a steel catapult at that. And from their effects, they were even more powerful than Daluan Ruozhen's wooden catapults. Release. Daluan Ruozhen's catapult formation was not the only one under attack. On the western side of the city of Talas, on the wall facing the Arabs, Chen Burang's right hand swung down, and row after row of heavy steel catapults began to fire. Massive rocks howled into the air, arcing through the air and crashing into the rear of the more than 200,000 Arab soldiers. Bang! Massive rocks rained down on the Arab catapults, smashing apart the 10-meter-tall catapults. Boom! One of the rocks smashed into a small mountain of metal balls next to a catapult, pulverizing the metal balls and causing the black kerosene within them to spill over the ground. One of the Arab generals standing guard was too slow to react and was splashed by the black kerosene. Not good. Careful. This attack was so sudden that the Arab general standing guard next to the catapult formation paled. But before he could react, a fire arrow pierced through the air and into the black kerosene. Bang! Flames soared into the sky, igniting even the Arab soldiers who had been stained by the black kerosene. Ah! Screams resounded through the air, opening the curtain on this attack. Boom! 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 Under Chen Burang's command, one massive rock after another fell from the walls of the city of Talas, smashing into the Arab catapult formation. The attacks of the catapults were random and had no accuracy to speak of. The range of their attacks was also rather large, completely incomparable to the accuracy of the ballistae. But the ferocious attacks of these steel catapults, coupled with Chen Burang's extraordinary perception and hearing, immediately unleashed a frightening power. Although these steel catapults were not as accurate as the ballistae, under Chen Burang's command, their accuracy was rather frightening. Boom boom boom. Hundreds of rocks were hurled from the walls of Talas, aimed at the metal balls piled up around the catapults. As these metal balls were smashed apart, the black kerosene stored within them poured out and flowed freely on the ground. Every time this happened, there would be a fire arrow that would suddenly fly over and land on the ground, causing a huge fire that soared into the sky. The entire Arab catapult formation had been transformed into a sea of fire. Thick plumes of smoke soared into the sky and blotted out the sunlight. Change directions. Aim at the walls of Talas. It's useless. They're too high up. Our range isn't enough. Chapter 9:11. Hurry. Push the catapults back and get out of here. Don't let them all be destroyed. An Arab officer quickly reacted and began to push the catapults away from the battlefield. Although the Arab catapults were large and heavy, each one had 7 or 8 large wheels attached to it, allowing it to move smoothly. But how could Chen Burang allow them to successfully withdraw at a time like this? Boom boom boom. A dense rain of stones rained down from the sky. In just a few waves of attacks, 80% of the catapult formation that the Arabs had built up with great difficulty had been destroyed. Those steel balls that had been placed next to the catapults to make them easier to throw had now become the Arabs' most fatal flaw. The entire catapult formation was aflame. Damn it! In the blink of an eye, the large metal balls shot toward the first defense line of the Tang people vanished, the sea of fire and smoke vanishing, leaving behind only a few embers. In the rear of the army, Abu Muslim and Ziyad both grimaced at this sight. The advantage they had built up earlier had been instantly obliterated. Fahada, kill that Tang people general on the walls. Abu Muslim's eyes darkened as he suddenly ordered. The Arab catapult squads had destroyed many sturdy cities in the past, but they had never been destroyed by enemy catapults and burned by their own kerosene. Abu Muslim could tell at a glance that the crux of the problem lay with that young Tang people general on the walls of Talas. Yes. A fully armored Arab general strode out from behind Abu Muslim, his voice loud and clear. Creak creak. With the twang of a bowstring, the Arab commander called Fahada gripped an ivory bow that was half a man's height in his left hand and a metal arrow more than 5 feet long in his right. The arrowhead was as red as blood, like a shining ruby, and he aimed it at Chinburang. The moment the bowstring was drawn, all the light in a radius of 100 feet began to twist and gather on the arrow in Fahada's hand. The ruby arrowhead exuded an extremely dangerous light. Boom! There was a massive boom, and it was like a clap of thunder had exploded in the sky. Before anyone could react, the arrow in the hand of the famed Arab archer, Fahada, had shot through the air like a lightning bolt toward the top of the city walls. This arrow moved with incredible speed. At the start it was still in Fahada's hand, but a moment later, it was already on the walls of Talas, only a few zhang from Chinburang, who was commanding the army. Buzz! Seeing the sudden appearance of this arrow, Chinburang's expression changed. Although his ears had already heard the arrow, his body could not keep up. His opponent was much, much stronger than him. A Saint Martial archer. This thought flashed through Chinburang's mind, and his face turned as white as paper. He was a member of the Kunwa training camp's deflecting blade manner and had extremely high attainments in the art of war and archery. In his hands, the catapults could display a terrifying might that no other officer could hope to match. Even though Chinburang was skilled in battle tactics, his cultivation wasn't as high as it seemed. If the Arabs sent a Saint Martial expert to deal with him, someone of Chinburang's cultivation level would be doomed. It's over. This was the only thought left in Chinburang's mind. Bang! As Chinburang closed his eyes to await death, there was a flash of light, and an invisible barrier of energy erupted from behind Chinburang and engulfed him. There was an earth-shattering explosion as Fahada's destructive arrow hit the chi shield. It was as if it had hit a layer of hard steel. Clang! The steel clanged and the shockwave spread in all directions. The ruby-like arrowhead and the arrow shaft smashed into the chi shield and turned to dust. Protector General. Hearing the commotion behind him, Chinburang opened his eyes and saw Anshi Protector General Gao Xianji slowly walking toward him. He gave a long sigh of relief. Continue to command. With me here, there's no need to worry. Gao Xianji's voice resounded in his ear as he casually took a few steps forward and placed Chinburang behind him. In the fierce winds, Gao Xianji's eyes exploded with a sharp light as he looked past the void to Abu Muslim and the famous Arab archer behind him. Abu Muslim also seemed to sense something, and his body slightly leaned forward as he looked at Gao Xianji on the walls. These two foes who had been fighting at Talas for more than 2 months were now exuding an intense desire to fight. "Milord, should we bring a few more generals?" Ziyad took 2 steps forward at an appropriate time and said. "There's no need. With Gao Xianji here, we can't kill him." Abu Muslim waved his hand and rejected Ziyad's suggestion. "The catapult formation has already been destroyed. There's no need to worry about it. Inform the soldiers on the front line to increase the intensity of the attacks. Before sunset, I want them to completely tear apart the Tang people's western defense line and destroy it. No matter what, we must thoroughly defeat the Tang dynasty." "Yes, milord." Ziyad understood and quickly left to deliver Abu Muslim's order. This battle was of the utmost importance, the decisive battle between Arabia and the Tang dynasty. A messenger alone would not be able to convey Abu Muslim's will, which was why Ziyad had personally taken action. In front of the gates of Talas, between the two defense lines, with Chen Burang's steel catapults engaged, Dalawan Ruozan and Abu Muslim's strategy swiftly crumbled. The catapults that Dalawan Ruozan had hidden behind the hills and the catapults that Abu Muslim had hidden in the rear of the army had all been destroyed in a few short moments. The flames and smoke on the battlefield vanished, and the situation of the more than 100,000 Chishi reinforcements was instantly reversed. Fire! Without the slightest hesitation, Chen Bin stood on his transport carriage and ordered the ballista teams around him to wildly fire at the Arab army. The first defense line was in a rather perilous situation. The kerosene attacks of the Arabs had rendered Chen Bin's ballista teams useless, allowing many of the Arab cavalry to reach the walls of the first defense line. All the steel walls and infantry shields were being battered by a furious storm of attacks, the sounds of collisions filling the ears of the soldiers. All the Arab cavalry at the very front were doing their utmost to break through the defense line. On the other side of the defense line, all the infantry were clenching their teeth and doing their utmost to hold on. Hold! Don't let them get close. Stop them. This is a military order. All the infantry were bulging with muscles, the veins on their foreheads bulging, and even their faces were red from exertion. It was at this moment that the attack of Chen Bin's ballista army arrived. Boom! 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 A dense barrage of ballista bolts once more appeared on the battlefield like the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Boom! An Arab horseman charging at the infantry shields was too slow to react, and just as he was about to charge at the shields again, a pitch-black ballista bolt pierced through his chest. The enormous force of the bolt lifted him off his horse and sent him crashing into a second Arab horseman, a third, a fourth. A single ballista bolt had instantly killed 7 or 8 fully armored Arab horsemen, and this was only the beginning. Swish swish swish. One ballista bolt after another howled through the air, each one claiming at least 6 Arab horsemen. In just one volley, 7 or 8,000 Arab cavalry had been killed. A second volley followed, a third volley, and so on and so forth. The Arabs were dying at an astonishing rate, and the steel defense line was littered with corpses of men and horses, their blood flowing freely across the ground. But the Arabs had gone completely berserk, no longer caring about casualties. When the two sides clashed in close combat, the Arabs were said to be at their most ferocious, terrifying, and invincible. As long as they could kill their foes, they would use their ferocious assaults to crush them, and the Arabs would not care about casualties. It was precisely this sort of courage and fearlessness that made the Arabs invincible from the Tsong Mountains all the way to the Red Sea. Kill! Tens of thousands of Arab cavalry had savage expressions on their faces as they charged toward the first defense line. Squelch! An Arab horseman raised his spear and threw it. The spear flew past the heavy shields of the infantry and into the dense ranks of the Tang army. Caught off guard, several Tang dynasty infantry were impaled by the spear and nailed to the ground. Spear after spear was thrown, and the Tang dynasty's Chishi reinforcements rapidly began to suffer casualties. Not only that, even under the dual assault of the beehives and ballistae, many Arabs were still able to use the corpses to scale the walls and fly over the tall shields. Swish swish swish. Behind the infantry shields, the regular soldiers of greater and lesser valor stabbed forward with their spears. These spears were like agile snakes, piercing through the chinks in the armor of the Arab soldiers and hanging onto their spears. The power of the pikemen of greater and lesser valor was on full display at this moment. In terms of penetrating armor, no one in the western regions could compare to them. But not even this could stop the Arabs. Fight! Kill them all! An Arab soldier stepped over the corpses and climbed over the steel wall, his scimitar in both hands as he began to slaughter the Tang soldiers. 1, 2, 3, countless Arab soldiers rushed forward, heedless of their own lives as they charged at the first defense line. One after another, neither the beehives nor the ballistae could stop them. Chapter 9:12. Release. Su Ke commanded the remaining ballista soldiers to work with the beehives to fire at the oncoming Western Turkic and Uzun cavalry. Doluan Ruozen's catapults had had far more impact than expected, especially on the ballista army led by Su Ke. All of them were the main targets of the Doluan Ruozen's catapults. The successive volleys of catapults had destroyed 40 to 50 ballista carts, and many more had been damaged by the catapults and were still in the process of being repaired. Although Chen Burang's catapults had succeeded in destroying the ballista army, the Western Turks and Uzun cavalry had managed to get to the second defense line. Su Ke could only seize this moment to shoot down the enemy and stop the Uzun and Western Turkic assault. Boom! 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 Volley after volley of ballista bolts howled through the air. Behind the second defense line, Tibetan and Turkic horsemen fell one after another, their corpses kicking up clouds of dust as they fell to the ground. Translated by Hypersheep 325. But the killing power of Su Ke's attack was far from being as great as it seemed. Doluan Ruozen and Dewusili had each of their cavalry equipped with a round shield. These Western Turkic and Uzun soldiers were hiding behind the round shields and on the backs of their horses. As a result, the actual lethality of the ballista bolts was reduced by several times. Often, a ballista bolt would only kill 4 or 5 Western Turkic and Uzun cavalry, 5 or 6 at most. But to the 120,000 Uzun and Western Turkic cavalry, this was a drop in the ocean. At the very least, it was not enough to heavily injure them. Ready! His vigorous and heavy voice resounded over the eastern battlefield like a great bell. Clang! Li Sai unsheathed his signature Tibetan sword from his Fergana steed. As he unsheathed his sword, the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry swiftly assembled behind him. The 5,000 cavalry were armed to the teeth, wearing meteoric metal armor and wielding wood steel swords. Whether it was in terms of spirit, energy, or physical strength, they were all at their peak. They could be said to be the strongest cavalry in the history of the Central Plains. More importantly, these 5,000 cavalry had a tacit understanding and discipline that no other cavalry could compare to. Everyone, hear my order. Prepare to attack. The clattering of swords being unsheathed resounded through the second defense line. At this moment, Li Sai and the Wuxian cavalry were far from the only ones preparing to attack. Chen Burang, Zhuang Jingping, Qi Weisi, and the other elites of Deflecting Blade Manor, as well as the other officers of the Qixi reinforcements and the hired cavalry of the western regions, had arranged themselves into square formations, their eyes focused forward as they prepared for battle. This was not the first time that the Deflecting Blade Manor and the mercenaries of the western regions had worked together with Li Sai in the Battle of Talas, and both sides were ready to attack at any moment. Awu! Tens of thousands of wolves surged forward. Dewusili had brought countless wolves with him, and these wolves came wave after wave as if there was no end to them. As soon as the beehives were cleared, another would come howling in. In the sky, the vultures began to cry like babies as they swooped down once more. But most alarming of all were the more than 100,000 charging Western Turkic and Uzun cavalry. Kill! The Turkic and Uzun cavalry roared as they picked up speed. Neither the attacks of the beehives nor the volley of ballista bolts could stop them. 20 zhang. 10 zhang. Charge! Seeing that the Uzun and Western Turks were about to charge, Li Sai immediately pointed his sword and charged out from behind the steel walls like a bolt of lightning. Boom! At almost the same time, the earth quaked as the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry followed Li Sai like 5,000 unsheathed blades. The momentum of this charge was enough to shake the heavens and shake the earth. Not even 50,000 could match the momentum of this charge. Kill! At the same time, Chen Burang, Zhuang Jingping, Qi Weisi, and the other Qixi reinforcements also charged forward. Tens of thousands of cavalry roared as they charged at incredible speed toward the Western Turks and Uzun. This time, behind the steel defense line on the west, Wang Chong had adopted a completely different strategy from the first defense line. More than 40,000 Tang dynasty cavalry charged out from behind the defense line, holding nothing back. In the face of these Western Turks and Uzun cavalry, the Tang dynasty did not choose to retreat, but to charge forward. In the Central Plains, the Tang dynasty had no reason to retreat, whether it was the cavalry of the Western Turkic Khaganate or the cavalry of the Uzun. Rumble. It was as if two prehistoric beasts had collided heavily. Behind the second line of defense, both sides did not hesitate at all, nor did they turn around at all. Rumble. In a flash, thousands of Western Turks and Uzun cavalry fell to the hooves of the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry. Before the edge of the Wuxia steel swords, the armor that the Western Turks and Uzun were so proud of was like paper. In a flash, swathes of Wuxian steel had been cut down. The 5,000 Wuxian cavalry cut through the crowd like they were vegetables, none of them able to last one round. Rumble. In a single charge, the elite cavalry of the Western Turks and Uzun had been crushed, throwing the army into chaos. Charge. Those who offend my Tang dynasty will be executed no matter how far away they are. Kill them all. Provoked by Li Sai and his Wuxian cavalry, Sun Jiming, Zhuang Jingping, Qi Weisi, and the other elites of Deflecting Blade Manor felt their blood rush to their heads, and they led the cavalry behind them in a charge. Boom boom boom. Defensive halos, charging halos, offensive halos, strength halos, all of them exploded like bamboo shoots after the rain. Halos clashed with halos and warhorses collided with warhorses as the two sides clashed. Sun Jiming, Zhuang Jingping, and Qi Weisi each led tens of thousands of soldiers in a courageous charge. But unlike ordinary cavalry, Sun Jiming and the others were not simply fighting with the Turks and Tibetans, but working with Li Sai to widen their gains. Nay. Sun Jiming's cavalry followed behind Li Sai in an arc, instantly crashing into the flank of the 8,000 Uzun cavalry. Moreover, they had chosen the spot where the 8,000 soldiers were most disorderly. Be it in terms of timing or positioning, this wave of assault was impeccable. Hong hong hong. The sound of horses colliding against each other could be heard, sabers flashing and horses neighing could be heard. The army led by Sun Jiming had arrived at just the right moment. With just a single charge, the 8,000 soldiers were torn apart. The two armies that had been thrown into disarray by Li Sai's charge were once more thrown into disarray by Sun Jiming's assault. At the same time, Zhuang Jingping, Qi Weisi, Gao Feng, Nia Yan, and the other members of Deflecting Blade Manor worked together, charging through the path Li Sai had opened up to the left and right flanks. Whether it was Zhuang Jingping, Qi Weisi, Gao Feng, or Nia Yan, they had all received Wang Chang's education in the art of war in Deflecting Blade Manor. Not only that, when Wang Chang was not present, they had also learned from each other under Wang Chang's instructions. Sun Jiming had once given a public lecture in Deflecting Blade Manor on what he had learned from Wang Chang and his own understanding of cavalry tactics, imparting them to everyone. Under the guidance of the future number 1 cavalryman of Great Tang, regardless of whether it was Zhuang Jingping, Qi Weisi, Gao Feng, Nia Yan, or the others, their understanding of cavalry and tactics far surpassed that of ordinary people. Their strength might not be very strong, but their ability to sense and execute battle tactics was extremely shocking. Boom boom boom. The bone-chilling galloping of horses could be heard from the second defense line as wave after wave of Great Tang cavalry, led by the men of Deflecting Blade Manor, charged forward like a tide, sweeping away everything in its path. The 40,000 Tang dynasty cavalry instantly scattered the 60,000 Uzun and Western Turkic cavalry. Even Wuxia, Daluan Ruozan, Huishu Wazang, and Dusong Mengpoj couldn't help but widen their eyes at this sight. Who are these people? When did the Tang dynasty have so many formidable individuals? Even the Qixi Protectorate has so many famous generals. Wuxia was an experienced and knowledgeable person, and he had originally thought that he would only be dealing with Gao Xianji and Wang Chong, as well as a few other famous generals of the Anxi Protectorate army. He had never imagined that Wang Chong would have so many formidable tactical generals under his command. They didn't seem to be very strong, but their ability to grasp opportunities in battle was simply unbelievable. Even standing on the hill, Wuxia could feel the threat of this unsheathed edge. The thousands of cavalry led by the junior generals of the Tang dynasty were like sharp swords, repeatedly thrusting in and out. Even the experienced and battle-hardened elite soldiers that Wuxia and Daluan Ruozhen had brought were being scattered. One could easily imagine the sharpness of their edge. "I don't know," Daluan Ruozhen finally said, his brow creased. Wuxia was not the only one surprised. In the past, he had only known that Wang Chong was a master of strategy, tactics, and commanding, but he had no idea that even Wang Chong's subordinates were so formidable. With such subordinates, Wang Chong was like a tiger that had grown wings. As for their own weaknesses, they weren't that important at a time like this. "I heard that the Tang dynasty had 3 specialized military training camps, all of them established at the behest of the Tang dynasty's holy emperor. In the Kunwa training camp, there's a deflecting blade manor that was established by the current Qixi Protector General. That deflecting blade manor absorbed quite a few students from the Kunwa training camp, so it's probably them." Daluan Ruozhen's hair flew in the wind as he spoke. Chapter 9:13. Li Sai, Sun Jiming, Gao Feng, Nia Yan, countless Qixi reinforcements were madly charging in front of the second defense line. But these 40,000 some cavalry were far from enough to stop the charge of the more than 100,000 Uzun and Western Turkic elites. Soldiers are valued for quality, not quantity. This battle was taking place at Talas, to the west of the Tsong Mountains, several thousand li away. If news of this arduous expedition didn't leak out, it was impossible to bring too many soldiers. Thus, even though they didn't seem to have brought many soldiers, Daluan Ruozhen only 70,000 and Wuxia 40,000 some, they were all elites among elites. The more than 100,000 Western Turkic and Uzun elites continued to charge forward like an unending tide against the 40,000 Tang dynasty soldiers. Even the charge of the Wuxian cavalry under Li Sai's command was far from enough to stop them. Some of the Western Turkic and Uzun cavalry even circled around Li Sai and Sun Jiming to join Wuxia's wolf pack in charging at the second defense line. And the ballista army led by Su Kai was their primary target. Nay! A warhorse neighed as a Western Turkic horseman galloped over the piles of wolf corpses in front of the second defense line, leaping over the heavy shields of the infantry to land in the rear of the defense line. Swish swish swish. Countless sabers, spears, swords, and halberds stabbed at the horseman. The moment the Western Turkic horseman landed, his body was riddled with holes, blood gushing out of his wounds. He was a corpse that couldn't be more dead. But this also served as a symbolic signal. Once the first person charged through the defense line and into the army, the Turks and Tibetans would begin to whinny and leap into the air, joining the ranks of the Tibetans and Turkic cavalry. Translated by Hypersheep 325 Kaiyil. At the same time, a crazed roar resounded over the battlefield, but it was not in the language of the Tang dynasty, but in the bloodthirsty and brutal Arabic. Although Khaled's Iron Beast army had been completely crippled by Su Bin's ballista army, Khaled's Iron Beast army had been completely crippled. Even so, the Iron Beast Corps was still very useful. They carried the corpses they found on the battlefield and even wounded warhorses, using their own bodies to block the ballista's attacks. Although the Iron Beast Corps had lost their warhorses, the Iron Beast Halo and Dark Blood Shield were still in effect and could still reduce the ballista's damage. Roar! A horseless Iron Beast army soldier, his veins bulging, picked up a large horse corpse and charged at a ballista. The huge crossbow bolt pierced through the horse's corpse and pierced through the armor on his body. However, it was deflected by his charge and shot towards the sky. Only the Arabian Empire, which lived and died in battle, could be so ferocious and fearless, using its own body to block the ballista bolts even though it clearly knew the power of the ballista bolts. The fearless bravery of the Iron Beast army had given the Arabian army an extremely valuable opportunity to fight. Tens of thousands of soldiers had fallen to the attacks of the beehives and ballistae, but tens of thousands of warhorses had also used this chance to charge up the steel walls. People were constantly pushing through the dense forest of spears, stepping over the corpses and climbing over the walls. Even when they landed on the ground and were turned into porcupines by the barrage of ballistae, they still rushed forward. Fear was nowhere to be seen on the faces of these Arabs. The more they died, the more bloody and cruel they were, the more they seemed to stimulate their will to fight. Behind the steel defense line, the mercenaries of greater and lesser valor couldn't help but widen their eyes in fear at the sight of the Arabs roaring like wild beasts, let alone the other mercenaries. In the legends of war to the west of the western regions, the Arabs were synonymous with death. Countless powers and empires had felt the terrifying and fearless will of the Arabs, and their fighting spirit had crumbled, scattering like birds and beasts on the battlefield. Their cities and countries had been destroyed by the Arabs, creating the legend of the Arabs' invincible and undefeatable existence. One wave, 2 waves, 3 waves, one wave of Arab soldiers after another surged toward the first defense line, toward the steel defense line. Hold! Axemen, get ready! Archers, get ready! In the entire battlefield, the ones who were the most solemn and calm were undoubtedly the infantry corps led by Wang Yan and Wang Fu. Row by row, they stood behind the first line of defense without moving an inch, like a rock in the middle of a river. No matter how fierce the Arabs' attacks were, no matter how fearless they were, and no matter how many times they charged, they were never able to penetrate the infantry formations led by Wang Yan and Wang Fu. In this section of the defense line, Wang Yan and Wang Fu had the highest casualty rate of any Arab. No matter how many Arabs broke through the steel walls, the heavy shields of the infantry, the hornets, and the ballistae, when they finally reached Wang Yan's infantry formations, they were all doomed to die. In the rear section of the army, the nearly 10,000 infantry had solemn expressions, and they had never even been mobilized. In this era where cavalry was king, even though the terrain of the Tang dynasty was naturally not suited to raising high-quality warhorses, nor was it dominated by cavalry, when it came to infantry, no faction in the world could compare to the Tang dynasty. The Tang dynasty had used its massive infantry armies to crush the Uzun, the eastern and western Turks, Goguryeo, and Mengshi-Zhao, all the way to the western regions. That was the era of infantry. The Tang dynasty had allowed everyone to witness the power of the infantry armies of the Central Plains, thus establishing the Tang dynasty as its current hegemon. Across the 4 seas, only the Great Tang could use its infantry to resist all the cavalry formations and resist the attacks of all the cavalry. Although the infantry under Wang Yan's command could not compare to cavalry in terms of charging power or mobility, in a positional battle, they were like an impenetrable fortress. When used with Wang Chang's steel defense line, they were able to display their formidable defensive capabilities to the extreme. Wind! The wind howled. Behind the first line of defense, surrounded by 4 black armored guards, Wang Yan's expression was solemn as he suddenly waved his right hand. Whoosh! The thousands of shield men guarding the gap in the steel walls suddenly retreated, revealing a massive path behind them. In the blink of an eye, thousands of such huge tunnels appeared behind the first defense line that had not been breached for a long time. Buzz! For a moment, the Arab soldiers behind the defense line had their minds go blank in shock at the sudden appearance of these gaps. But a moment later, thousands of Arabs roared and swung their scimitars as they charged through the gaps. The Arab cavalry behind them paid no attention to what was happening in front of them, roaring as they followed. Fire! Wang Yan's expression was resolute. He waved his right hand again, and in the next moment, there was the sound of metal clanging. The shield-bearers cooperated with the axemen behind them, and with a rumble, they once again cut off these tunnels. The gap in the first defense line was sealed up, and the Arab soldiers who had tried to charge in were like turtles in a jar. Kill! A series of battle cries shook the heavens and the earth. The moment the gap was closed, countless sabers, spears, swords, and halberds stabbed over from all directions. No matter how powerful, fierce, and valiant the Arab cavalry were, no matter how fearless they were, in the face of the vastly outnumbering Tang dynasty infantry, all of them were instantly felled into pools of blood, not even stirring up a ripple. Wind. Fire. In Wang Yan's hands, this tactic was repeated over and over again, allowing batch after batch of Arab soldiers to enter and killing them. By the time the shield-bearers closed the gap, not a single Arab horseman would be able to survive for more than a few seconds against Wang Yan's infantry formations. In Wang Yan's hands, infantry were not only used for defense, but also for offense. They could attack while defending, and defend while attacking. The 20,000-some infantry were like the most precise machine, using extreme efficiency to slaughter the charging Arab cavalry. One wave at a time, one wave at a time, one wave at a time, one wave at a time. Even the Arab cavalry were intimidated by this extreme calmness and composure. The mercenaries of the western regions who were adjacent to Wang Yan's infantry formations were also unwittingly affected and began to work with Wang Yan's infantry formations to fend off the Arab charge. This was also the toughest area of the defense line. It's about time. Between the two defense lines, amidst thousands of warhorses, Wang Chong rode the white-hoofed shadow, motionless beneath the flapping banner of the Tang dynasty. As he listened to the fierce fighting on both sides, a sharp light flashed through his eyes. This battle was already reaching its most intense phase. The Arabs, Western Turks, and Uzan soldiers had all put in their full strength, and the two defense lines to the east and west were both under enormous pressure. And now, it was time for the most important part of Wang Chong's plan. Buzz. A white light brighter than the sun exploded out of Wang Chong's eyes amid the fierce winds. Rumble. The entire eastern and western battlefields began to quake. With Wang Chong at the center, a milky white halo descended from Wang Chong's body and began to expand, sweeping across the battlefield like a hurricane. The bane of the battlefield halo. As the four sides clashed and the battle intensified, Wang Chong immediately unleashed the bane of the battlefield halo. Bzzz. The dazzling halos beneath the feet of the tens of thousands of Uzan, Western Turkic, and Arab cavalry began to flicker like candles in the wind. Before anyone could react, clang clang clang. The tens of thousands of war halos on the battlefield began to dim. Chapter 9:14. What's going on here? Abu Muslim, who had been sitting in the rear of the battlefield as steady as Mount Tai, shuddered and stood up from his seat, a look of extreme shock on his face for the first time. He had participated in so many wars and conquered so many countries, but he had never encountered such a thing. The auras of more than 200,000 elite Arab cavalry had been greatly weakened in a single moment. Not only that, this abrupt change had thrown the Arabs fighting at the front into chaos. The Arab cavalry at the very front, unable to react in time, were turned into sieves by the pikemen. Boom! A long ballista bolt howled through the air, instantly crossing over the heavy shields and appearing more than 20 zhang away as it shot toward the rows of Arab cavalry. Translated by Hypersheep 325 Ruor. A soldier of the Iron Beast army roared as he grabbed the corpse of a warhorse and lunged at that thick ballista bolt. But this time, the dark blood shield and Iron Beast halo that could be used to resist the power of the crossbow bolts didn't come into effect. After the huge crossbow bolt pierced through the warhorse's corpse, it effortlessly pierced through the Iron Beast soldier's heavy armor. Then, it didn't slow down at all and dragged him into the air. Then a third, a fourth. In a few short moments, the black ballista bolt had pierced through the bodies of 8 or 9 Arab horsemen and nailed the last 4 to the ground. Plush plush plush. Similar scenes were taking place all over the battlefield. Tens of thousands of ballista bolts filled the air, covering the entire battlefield. They were still firing ballista bolts, but the effect this time was completely different. Bang! 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 The sound of corpses falling to the ground could be heard as the first line of defense was instantly emptied under the barrage of crossbow bolts. Release! 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 Within the ballista army, Chen Bin had a cold and aloof expression as he stood atop a transport carriage, his sword constantly swinging down. After fighting with Wang Chong for so long, Chen Bin was well aware of what had happened just now. This was an extremely rare opportunity, the perfect opportunity for the ballista army to display its might. Swish swish swish. 9,000. 10,000. 11,000. 12,000. The Arabs instantly suffered heavy casualties under the barrage of ballistae, and the number of casualties continued to rise. In this single volley, 25,000 Arab cavalry had fallen to Chen Bin's ballista army. At the same time, the Arabs were not the only ones affected. The Uzun and Western Turks on the Eastern Front had also been affected. On the Eastern Front, the Uzun and Western Turkic cavalry had relied on their overwhelming numbers to temporarily suppress Li Sai, Sun Jiming, Zhuang Jingping, and Qi Weisi, but the moment Wang Chong used the bane of the battlefield, the situation immediately reversed. The Western Turks and the Uzun were in a very bad situation, and many of their soldiers were killed in the charge of the Wuxian cavalry and the other Tang dynasty cavalry. What's that? What did that kid do just now? In the rear, de Wusseli's eyes narrowed, his pupils constricting. He was just as shocked as Abu Muslim. Almost subconsciously, de Wusseli turned to Daluan Ruozan and Huishu Wuzong. This was de Wusseli's first encounter with Wang Chong, but Daluan Ruozan and Huishu Wuzong were different. If there was one person who could explain what was happening on the battlefield, it was probably Daluan Ruozan. Great General, I also have no way of explaining this matter. Daluan Ruozan bitterly smiled. He naturally knew what de Wusseli was thinking, but Daluan Ruozan also had no way of explaining this situation. Even though this was not his first time fighting with Wang Chong, there were still many mysteries about Wang Chong that he did not understand, like what was happening right now. In truth, I already encountered this sort of thing in the War of the Southwest, but it was far from being as powerful as it is now. It seems like it's not just his status in the Tang dynasty that has risen, but his strength outside of the art of war has also grown. There were far too many mysteries about Wang Chong. His art of war, his use of steel modules, the thousands of li of cement roads he had built in the Tang dynasty, and his use of that unique halo. Daluan Ruozan had never encountered an existence as inexplicable as Wang Chong. His background and growth could be traced, but the things about him could not be explained with that. It was as if they were two completely different people. There's no other way. Perhaps only a great general can counteract this wave of influence. Daluan Ruozan said, his eyes fixed on de Wusseli and Huishu Wuzong. Even though he had made ample preparations for this battle, there were still some things that were beyond Daluan Ruozan's abilities, like a battle between martial artists. Daluan Ruozan was famed for his intelligence, strategy, so he was called the wise minister. He considered the overall situation, not the strength of a single individual. That aspect was something that top-class great generals like de Wusseli, Huishu Wuzong, and Dusong Mengpoj had to consider. This scene had become Wang Chong's challenge to de Wusseli and Huishu Wuzong. That's all we can do. De Wusseli subconsciously creased his brow. As the highest commander, he normally would not lightly step onto the battlefield. Only in a few crucial moments or when the enemy great generals entered the fray would he make an exception. But the Tang dynasty had not sent any great generals into the fray. A single halo was enough to force him to break convention and enter the fray early. This made de Wusseli very unhappy. Not only that, all halos consumed energy. In other words, they would consume the strength of de Wusseli's forces. In the later stages of the battle, when great generals fought against great generals, this would become extremely fatal. This was also why all the commanders of the armies had tacitly agreed to not enter the fray in the early stages of the battle. But the current situation was beyond his control. If he did not enter the fray, the Western Turkic cavalry would quickly be routed by the 40,000 Tang dynasty cavalry. This was something that de Wusseli could not allow. Buzz! De Wusseli raised his head and straightened his back, his eyes flashing with a sharp and cold light as he took a step forward. Rumble. The moment Wuxia's war boots stomped on the ground, the hills trembled and a golden flame spread out from under Wuxia's feet. It instantly transformed into a dazzling golden halo of the Saint Martial realm, within which were several imperial crowns. These crowns were different from those of the Central Plains. These crowns were carved with images of sheep and wolves, and atop the hemispherical crown was a golden eagle spreading its wings. This was the typical crown of a Western Turkic Khagan. Bzzz. As Wuxia moved, golden halos began to spread from Wuxia's feet to cover the entire Turkic army. In a flash, Wang Chang's bane of the battlefield halo was greatly weakened. Bang! At almost the same time, Uzun Great General Wuxia Wuzong took 2 steps forward and stomped down, unleashing his own war halo. Another powerful halo flew through the air like a storm, spreading beneath the feet of the tens of thousands of Uzun cavalry to resist Wang Chang's bane of the battlefield halo. The Uzun and the Western Turks were not the only ones doing the same thing. Outside the second defense line, the earth rumbled as if some enormous power had struck the ground. Abu Muslim had also moved, pitch-black halos bolstering his army and radiating to the feet of the Arab cavalry. Wang Chang's halo had mobilized the Western Turks, Uzun, and Arab forces, forcing 3 elite great generals to take action at the same time. This was unprecedented in history. As expected, they've moved out. In the distance, Wang Chong and his white-hoofed shadow stood beneath the fluttering banner of the Qixi Protectorate. Not only was he not surprised by this sight, he even gave a faint smile. There were hidden schemes and open schemes. Wang Chong had used an open scheme for the first time on the battlefield, and this was his second. In order to resist the effects of the bane of the battlefield halo, Wuxia Wuzong, Wuxia, and Abu Muslim were forced to use their strongest halos to passively respond. The battle had only just begun, but the 3 highest commanders of Uzun, the Western Turks, and the Arabs were already beginning to weaken. Halos consumed energy, and the longer this battle continued, the faster Wuxia Wuzong, Wuxia, and Abu Muslim's strength would fall. If this battle continued for more than an hour, the 3 of them would fall from the peak of the Saint Martial realm. But this was completely different for Wang Chong. Although the bane of the battlefield halo consumed energy, it was so minuscule that it had almost no effect. What it consumed was the energy in the world itself. Since that's the case, I might as well fulfill your wish. Wang Chang's hair rustled in the wind as he faintly smiled and unleashed his other halo. Boom! There was another flash of light from Wang Chang's body. Right after the bane of the battlefield halo, Wang Chang's second bane of general's halo burst out of his body and engulfed the entire battlefield. Bzzz. In a flash, the battlefield that had been under the control of Wuxia Wuzong, Wuxia, and Abu Muslim changed once more. The Uzun, Western Turkic, and Arab generals in the middle of the army suddenly felt their auras flicker like candlelight. In a flash, all of them had dropped an entire level. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.